This is probably the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I'm not on any medication, nor have I ever experienced sleep paralysis. I've rarely had any paranormal experiences, or scary experiences in general, which is why I'm kind of nervous to share mine, as I have no idea what the responses will be. But here goes nothing. So, I had a dream about two monkeys. They're the ones that have those huge red eyes and tiny pupils. I'm not sure what they're called, but they're terrifying to me. And they were climbing on top of each other. Under that was a caption that said, autism. Yeah, I don't know either. But then, the scene changed to a museum filled with giant snakes that were all in their own chambers. All the chambers had spaces in the wall that would allow them to escape if they wanted to, which is why I spent most of the dream flying in the air and pressing myself against the ceiling. And then I woke up because I actually felt something climb onto my mattress. I could literally feel the weight of whatever was climbing onto my bed, and the mattress was actually going down. And then on my other leg, I felt something small sitting on it. I immediately thought it was one of those monkey things, so I shook my leg hoping that it'd fall off my bed and hit its head hard enough to die or something. And then I heard this dog-like thing sniffing my inner thigh, so I stopped holding my breath thinking that it was my dog, and I stuck my thumb out trying to find its mouth so I could see if she'd lick me, because she usually does that, and it did. So, thinking it was my dog, I lifted my head from under the covers, but when I did, there was nothing there. I literally sat there just staring at nothing, thinking that somebody's head would pop out from the end of my bed or something, but nothing ever happened. I've had this happen to me before when I was younger, and it's something that I remember clearly. I was around the age of 11 or 12 and felt another child climb onto my bed, so I screamed for my parents naturally, and when they came in, they told me that nobody else was in the house. Does anyone know what's happening or have had any similar experiences to mine? So, this happened in 2011. I just gotten out of a rough relationship a few months prior to this happening as well. And my friends encouraged me to try dating again, so I eventually caved and made a profile on the website Plenty of Fish. I was surprised with just how many messages I'd received within the first few hours too. Most were just people saying hi or asking to hook up. I wasn't looking for a hookup, so I ignored those messages. And after about a week, a guy roughly about an hour away from me messaged me. And he was cute, so I messaged him back. The conversation was pretty casual at first. He asked if I'd like to go for a coffee sometime, and not thinking anything of it, I said sure. And this is where it started getting a bit weird though. He started to get pushy and asked when we could grab a coffee, and I told him that I didn't have my own car, so I'd have to borrow my mum's car to meet up with him. He offered to come and pick me up, but I wasn't comfortable with the idea. And the next message, it made my blood run cold, because it read, "I'm sure your hometown isn't that big. If I knocked on a few doors, someone would be able to tell me where you lived." I replied, "Are you crazy? I'm sorry, but that's kind of creepy." And this really pissed him off. He messaged me multiple times after this, and everything said, "You know I have a gun, right? I could shoot you and make you disappear. No one would look for you. You're nothing but a dirty slut, and I could kill you. I'll throw you down a well, and no one will ever find you." Obviously, I was really scared at this point, so I asked him just to please leave me alone. He replied, though, with the following, "I know where your hometown is. It's not a big town, and I can find you." At this point, I'd had enough, and I just blocked him. I reported this account to Plenty of Fish as well, and I deleted my account eventually. I was really on edge for the next few weeks after the fact. I was afraid that he was actually going to come look for me. Luckily, nothing ever came from it. But I do wonder what just would have happened if I had gone out for that coffee. So me and my mum were staying with a friend, and they put us up for a week or so in this small village while we visited. It was our first ever time visiting there. It creeped us out for sure. And while it was our first time visiting there, we didn't know at the time, but it was also going to be our last. So it was in the last few days of our visit that we decided to go to a pub to watch the royal wedding. My mum and her friend went out to get a cigarette, and I decided to go out to get some air as well. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary to me at first, but I distinctly remember my mum and her friend saying that it seemed eerily quiet and the outside had a really strange atmosphere to it. In the end, they pinned it down to everyone just watching the royal wedding. They carried on talking on the step of the door, and just around the corner is a bus stop which runs pretty regularly. A man got off and carried on walking. He seemed quite shifty, but again, we didn't think too much of it, and we didn't really see what he looked like, and the day carried on as normal. A few days later, we nipped to the shop just down the road from the place that we watched the wedding to get some sweets. While we were in there, a police officer entered and asked if we'd been around this exact place on the day of the royal wedding. We said that we'd been at the pub watching it, and she carried on to say that a family of 4 were murdered, and there were reports that the individual got on the bus that headed this way before he went and killed them. She proceeded to tell us about the suspect, and it turns out that it was that guy that had gotten off that bus, looked shifty, and then just walked away. We told the officer what we could, but couldn't be of much more help. The murders rocked the village, apparently, and the dude got caught and eventually got 40 years in prison.
Have you ever found any subscriptions that you forgot about, or any you paid for twice and didn't even realize it? I know I have. From old Netflix accounts to VPNs, I've done this countless times. How much do you think you're paying in subscriptions every month? The answer is probably more than you think. And did you know that over 74% of people have subscriptions that they've forgotten about? I certainly did, like this D&D map creation tool I haven't used in years that was costing me hundreds of dollars every year, which when I realized I was still paying for it, I was kicking myself for not realizing earlier. But thanks to Rocket Money, I'm no longer wasting money on the ones that I forgot about. So Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. With Rocket Money, I have full control over my subscriptions and a clear view of my expenses. I can see all of my subscriptions in one place, and if I see something that I don't want, Rocket Money can help me cancel it with a few taps. I really love how the dashboard shows me this month's spending compared to last month, so I can clearly see my spending habits and all that. Plus, they'll help me create a custom budget and keep my spending on track too. Rocket Money will even try to negotiate lower bills for you by up to 20%. All you have to do is submit a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money takes care of the rest. They'll deal with the customer service for you. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in cancelled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. So, stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/scared. That's rocketmoney.com/scared. rocketmoney.com/scared.
So me, my fiancée, and her children moved into our dream home house in September of 2018. And at first, everything was perfect. It wasn't until a few months after moving in, though, that we started to experience the strangeness, as we called it. The first situation happened one night when me and my fiancée were sleeping in our bedroom. We always slept with the lights off because, well, that's what normal people do, right? And I've never thought twice about it. However, this night just felt different. She was making strange noises, and I felt very strange, as if there was this kind of static-type energy around the room. She started mumbling in her sleep, and I couldn't make out any of the words, but she seemed as if she was struggling, maybe? I tried to wake her, but she just wouldn't wake up. I tried to ignore it in the end and go back to sleep, but this static, strange feeling just got so bad that I just had to turn on my bedside lamp. She just kept making these strange noises, and it made me so uncomfortable that I had this completely what felt like random sudden urge to close my bathroom door that was diagonal to our bed. I really can't explain what made me do this seemingly unrational decision, but it's as if everything in my entire being was telling me to close this bathroom door. Again, being a complete skeptic to anything paranormal or strange, I still couldn't shake this deep urge to close this door for some reason. So I got up from the bed to close it. Now, I only made it a few steps towards the bathroom door when my fiancée shot up straight in the bed, gasping for air, and began bawling her eyes out. I darted over to her to comfort her, and she began rambling about how she felt as if something was holding her down. Yet she said that she had left her body. I'm guessing sleep paralysis upon further research, but she was standing in the corner where the bathroom door was, allegedly. She said she saw me walking towards her, and that's what woke her up. Now, all this being said, I was a skeptic, and I didn't really believe in things like this. But she was not one to ever make something up like this, and with the look of complete horror on her face, I actually believed her. After that incident, we both agreed that we just didn't feel safe in that room anymore. Something felt off, so we both just went downstairs to sleep on our living room couch. That very same night, not even 30 minutes later, her son, only being 5 years old at the time, started screaming bloody murder. Due to the strange situation we had earlier, we were both still awake. I jumped off the couch and ran upstairs. He was already running downstairs to us, and we met in the kitchen on the middle floor. Once I was able to calm him down and stop him from crying, he was able to explain what was wrong. And he said that, clear as day, he saw black things coming out from his wall that were trying to hurt him. Now, I understand that he was just 5 years old. He could have had a bad dream for sure, but this was the very first time that he had ever claimed such a thing. Even the first time that he ever claimed to have a bad dream since I've known him, and I had been in the picture for well over 2 years at this point. Again though, being a skeptic, it just didn't seem possible in this moment, especially considering what had just happened 30 minutes before. And so, again, I believed him. So I comforted him and brought him down with me and his mother to the living room to sleep with us. And my fiancée also got her daughter from her room because it just didn't feel safe anymore leaving them alone. The next incident, though, was pretty small, but I still can't explain it. So a few weeks had passed from that night, and me and my fiancée were in our living room. She was on the sofa, and I was on this lazy boy. We were just watching TV, and the kids were in the upstairs living room just playing, and I remember my fiancée's daughter distinctively came downstairs to tell us something, but when she saw me, she started freaking out and crying. Us being worried, her mother went after her asking what was wrong, and she said the girl next to me was mad at her. Now, this was really strange because the only ones that were there were me, my fiancée, her son, and daughter. Confused, we asked her what she meant, and she directly said, "The girl in the weird white dress doesn't want me here." I remember being so thrown off from this that it made me kind of feel a bit ill, especially after what had happened already. I knew that something wasn't right, and she said that there basically was a little girl in a white dress next to me where I was sitting, and when she went to talk to me, she said that it didn't like her. I still to this day don't even know what to make of this because it's just really weird. But a few more weeks pass and things had almost gone back to normal, except not quite, because since that night, there just seemed to be a thick tension in the air, if that's the right way to put it. Something had shifted. My fiancée seemed tense and easily irritable, which was very against her nature. She would fly off the handle at things just a few weeks prior she wouldn't think twice about, and honestly, she just didn't seem herself. The next experience that happened follows a few weeks after this, and it was intense, and before I say the following, I need the reader to understand that I assure you that everything that I'm telling you is the truth. The details are a little bit blurry because I tried to push it out of my mind as best as I could. So, it started as a regular evening. I had just gotten home from work, and my fiancée and I were relaxing downstairs in the living room watching TV. Everything seemed normal. However, at some point, I noticed my fiancée had put on some headphones and was listening to music pretty loudly. Everything seemed normal, but at some point, I noticed my fiancée had put some headphones on and was listening to music pretty loudly. At the time, I didn't really think anything of it, but this was strange because she hadn't really done that before, especially since we were both watching TV together. It just kind of seemed peculiar, but again, I just brushed it off. However, she did seem really agitated towards me for some reason. I remember trying to recall if I'd done something to upset her, trying to rack my brain as I sat there, but I truly couldn't think of anything. So again, I just brushed it off. A few hours go by and she just seems increasingly agitated as well, to the point where she basically won't look at me. She's just kind of sitting in the corner of the couch listening to loud music, ignoring me. It starts to unsettle me, so I begin to ask her what's wrong. And she loses it. She starts throwing things at me, screaming at me. We fight over what, until this day, I seriously cannot for the life of me think of. I don't even remember what the argument was about, like at all, but it was just a blur. But the next thing I do remember is that she just storms upstairs. Me, still upset and really confused, I stay downstairs and I just continue watching TV, letting her go to give her some space. Maybe 30 minutes to an hour go by and I go to check on her and I find her upstairs in her bedroom on the floor, in the pitch black, crying on the floor. I go to her and ask her what's wrong, but she doesn't answer. She just continues to cry on the floor for a few more minutes and I continue to try and comfort her, but it's almost as if she doesn't even notice that I'm there. She then stands directly up, almost in like a trance sort of thing, and begins shuffling around the house really slowly. I follow her, asking her what the hell she's doing, but she never really gives me a reply. She just continues shuffling slowly around the house with this strange look on her face. She goes from our upstairs bedroom down the stairs to our kitchen in the middle floor. She then goes to the banisters in the kitchen and drops to her knees and begins banging her head on them. At this point, I know that something really strange is going down, but I just can't seem to help her or get her out of this trance-like stage. So I just follow her and I put my hands in front of her forehead so that she wasn't completely bashing her forehead on the banisters. I was pleading for her to stop and snap out of it, but she just completely ignored me as if I wasn't even there. Then she stood back up and began walking upstairs. She goes into our bedroom, walks into the bathroom, walks into our closet and drops to her knees. At this point, she's spluttering out what seemed to be nonsense that I just can't understand. She continues to bang her head on the carpeted closet floor. The whole time I'm trying to talk to her, get to her, but to no prevail. Eventually, though, I'm just over it. I'm freaked out beyond belief, and I just want this to be over. So I grab her and I try to lift her up, and she begins almost hissing at me, trying to bite me, and it frightens me, but I know that whatever the hell is going on, I can't just let her do this. So I forcefully herd her downstairs, and the whole time she's cussing at me, making really strange noises, and I get to the downstairs living room and I put her on the couch. Then she just starts laughing at me, almost in an evil way as well. Now, I know my fiancé, and this just wasn't her. The look on her face literally wasn't her own, and I could tell that something had taken her over or something like that. I know that sounds crazy, but that's the only way I can put it. So I out her on the couch and ask her what the hell is going on and what's happening. I can remember her laughing and just looking me in the face, saying that she's gone. She kept saying it over and over again. She's gone, you stupid fuck, she's gone. And when she started saying this stuff, I was completely terrified. I mean, I had seen enough scary movies to know what was happening. So I told her that I don't accept that. I kept trying to get to her, and this happened for a few minutes. All the while, I had to almost hold her on this couch. And the next thing I know, she lunges at me, trying to bite me. But this time is different. When she lunges towards me and grabs onto my shoulder, I feel this huge wave of energy that comes along with it. That's the best way I can explain it as well, just a wave of energy. She makes contact with me, and I feel this completely overwhelming wave of emotion and just nausea. I immediately run to a trash can just a few feet away and begin dry heaving extremely heavily. No vomit comes out, but I feel something coming out of my mouth, but I don't physically see anything. Seconds later, I begin crying uncontrollably, harder than I've ever cried in my entire life, just bawling, and I crawl up in a ball and I just cry my eyes out. I can feel this extremely strange emotion inside of me that I can't even begin to explain, but I just sit there on the floor and I cry. I notice my fiancée, after I begin vomiting, has collapsed on the floor. And even though I was crying my eyes out, I can still remember the way that she fell, because it was kind of like a rag doll was just dropped. Her knees just buckled and she fell to the carpet. Seconds later, she was gasping for air and crawled to me to comfort me. She then began saying, "I'm so sorry," over and over again. It only took a minute or two for me to regather myself, but after I did, I left that house because I just had to get out. The emotion that had taken over me was too overwhelming, and I felt like I was just emotionally drowning. I ran outside and my fiancée followed, and as soon as I got outside, I felt this feeling disappear. I felt normal again. Me and my fiancée just sat outside in our driveway until the morning came, and nothing that intense happened again, the remainder of our lease there as well. And you can bet your bottom dollar that we moved out September of 2019 as soon as our lease was up. But since that night, we never really felt safe in that house again. I really struggled sleeping there, and if I did, the lights were always on, and I only ever got a few hours a night. And as someone who has always been a bit of a skeptic of the paranormal, I really just don't know what to make of any of this. I try to be a fact-driven individual as much as possible, but no matter how hard I try, I just cannot explain what happened that night. I truly believe that it was something paranormal, and it was terrifying, and it's changed my views of what's out there for sure. Nothing has happened to us since we moved out of that house, and I'm really hoping that it stays that way. I tell my story mostly to just vent because I've never told anyone this. It feels really good though to get it off my chest because I've been living with this for some time. But if anyone has had any similar experiences and they feel like sharing, I'm definitely willing to listen because what happened to me has changed me forever. And to anyone out there who is going through something like this, I just want you guys to know that you're not alone. So, I was born with really beautiful eyes, just like my mum's. My eyes are dark blue on the outside, but on the inside they're like a light blue, different shades basically, and I also have a bit of brown around the pupils. So, I work at a gas station just off the main highway in Canada, so I meet a lot of different people. Some are creepy and some are okay. I've had older men look at me and ask if my eyes were real and if they could have them. Not that creepy, right? But then, there was this one guy that just took it a little too far. So, I was out doing some chores around the gas station like normal. It was extremely early and the sun hadn't popped up yet. My partner was inside, but he kept watching over me. Due to me being the youngest and a certain encounter that I had, my co-workers tend to be protective of me. He was watching me through the large windows, but there was a section where he couldn't see me, the dumpster. So, I happened to be in this section just cleaning up garbage when I saw a guy with a plastic bag walk up and tossed it in the dumpster. I have a habit of looking at the person who walks close to me, and when I looked at him, he must have noticed my eyes. The light outside was pretty strong, I'll admit. And he says to me, "Are your eyes real?" I say, "Yeah," trying to continue to work. And he says, "Wow, they're beautiful," walking closer to me. I say, "Thanks," feeling uncomfortable once again, but I'm used to this. And then he says, "Can I have them?" I let out a small chuckle thinking that he was joking, as a lot of people did. But when he didn't laugh and he just stared at me, I began to feel a little bit uneasy. So I stopped what I was doing and I turned to leave, and that's when he grabbed my arm. "No, I want your eyes. Sir, please let go of me. Oh, come on. I want to stare at those eyes forever. Sir." I tried to free my arm from him, but he happened to be stronger than me and didn't let go. "Please, just let go of me." I did another tug, and I finally freed myself from him, and I ran inside. I told my partner what had happened, but when he went outside to confront the man, he had disappeared. I honestly don't know if he was just on drugs or if he was crazy, and honestly, I don't want to find out. To some, this might not be bad, but to me, it was definitely creepy. I mean, yeah, sure, I've had people comment about my eyes and people jokingly ask for them. My co-workers did the same when we first met, but this guy seemed serious. After a painful breakup, I decided to try Tinder and Bumble. I'd gone on a few dates on both, and everything went fine. This one guy on Tinder seemed nice enough, and he was attractive and intelligent, and a school teacher in the area too. We talked for about 2 weeks before the idea of a date came up, but he said that he'd been in a recent auto accident leading to a concussion. He was thus advised against unnecessary driving for at least a month, and as a person in the medical field, this actually checked out to me. We talked for about 2 months as he was healing, and then finally had our date. We had lunch at a place that he picked. It was fine, and the food was good, and the alcohol selection was nice. He was rude to the waitress, which put him in the negative, along with his MySpace photo angles. But after lunch, he asked if I would take a walk with him through this park. I said yes, and we drove there separately. It was about 1 mile away. We walked through the park until we came by some swings. I beelined for them because I love swings, and there was nobody else in the park. As I was happily swinging, he stood there just watching me, and finally he asked, "Hey, what do you think would happen if you were to die right now? How would you feel?" And I laughed, feeling happy on the swings, and I said, "I'd be happy, I guess." And then he asked, "Well, what would you feel if someone made that happen?" And so I asked what he meant, and he elaborated. "What would you feel if I were to make you crack your head as you fell off the swings?" That's all the specifics that I remember, because what followed was this guy describing how he would kill and torture me. I don't remember the specifics, but I do remember thinking, "Oh crap, there's no one here, let's keep him happy," and agreeing to certain words like scream, pain, and big. Finally, a family started down the hill toward us, and as soon as I saw them, I booked it, him at my heels blathering about whatever it was that he was talking about. I got to my car, and there was a full audience at this point, and he leaned into me saying, "So I'm going to lean into you," and I flinched away from him, and he straightened up and ran to his car and left. I tried to report him on Tinder, but he had already deleted his account at this point. He never did tell me his last name. He explicitly wouldn't when I asked that day as well. 2 weeks later, he texted me saying that my manners were horrible and that my swing set banter was terrible. I blocked him, and I had nightmares for weeks afterwards. So this was back in high school and prom night. I was a sophomore loser just helping take down decorations, so no booze for me, full disclosure. I was 16, and it might have been 1 o'clock in the morning by the time that I was driving home from the train station where prom was held. Actually a really nice venue, to be honest, in rural southern VA. At the time, I drove this piece of crap 1994 F-150, which was built like a frickin' tank, and I wasn't super familiar with the roads around the train station, but the one that I was on had cornfields on both sides for a few acres back. Then it turned into the deep woods. I'm headed home doing maybe 45 when, all of a sudden, half of my truck just pops up and down like I've hit the mother of all speed humps on one side. And, having just got my license, I was like, oh shit. So I pulled over to make sure that I hadn't messed up a blown tire. I put the truck in park and look back for a second, and when I do, I see this huge mass just laying in the middle of the road that 100% was not there when I stopped. My first instinct was, I just killed someone's dog, and my heart drops. I've got my hand on the door handle, ready to go see if this dog is okay, when the hairs on my arms just stand up. On instinct, I look in the rearview mirror to see this thing getting up, and at first I was kind of stoked, and maybe surprised that it was bigger than I thought, but stoked that it was alive, and then it really stood up, like on 2 legs. Mind you, this was all illuminated by my crappy brake lights in the middle of nowhere, and I was pretty freaked out. But when it stood up, I could tell that it was kind of hunched over. Even then, it was almost as tall as the 9 or 10-foot corn in the fields. It had a massive rib cage, emaciated, long face. A hollow-looking thing just stood up and looked dead at me before shuffling across the road back into the fields. And at that, I just took off and drove home and cried a bit. And eventually, when I got home, I just went to sleep. I found a massive dent in my fender the next morning, and I knew that I had really hit something. It messed me up for a good while, and even now, I still don't like driving at night. A few years ago, me and my friend had decided to check out an old house that we had found. It was at the edge of some woods in a clearing and pretty derelict. Overall, it looked pretty eerie, but we were looking for an adventure, so we carried on with our plan. The front door was boarded shut pretty tight, so we headed to the back and it was also boarded up. Next to the door was a window that looked fairly easy to slide up. The glass was broken and there were cobwebs on the inside. We looked through the window and noticed the inside was pretty empty aside from a few bottles on the floor. We managed to slide the window up and we climbed inside. And instantly, there was a smell that I can only describe as just putrid like garbage. The room that we were in, though, seemed to have previously been a lounge or a dining room or something, but there was no furniture, obviously. Directly across from where we had entered, there was an old kitchen. The floor tiles had been removed, along with any appliances, leaving the walls pretty much bare, aside from outlines of where they had previously been. We moved into the next room, which still had the carpet and an old painting hung on the wall above a door next to it, where a few empty bottles of what I assume was alcohol were. We opened the door, and there were these stairs leading downstairs into darkness, and when we opened the door, we could just barely hear a faint tapping noise coming from down there. We didn't have a flashlight, so we didn't want to go down there. So we just closed the door and headed towards the staircase at the end of the room. But as we headed up, we noticed the smell in the air was just getting stronger. At the top, none of the rooms had doors apart from one. The door was black and it looked like it was covered in scratches that it kind of looked like claw marks. One of the rooms was a bathroom that was empty, apart from a bathtub. The bottom was covered in yellow spots, but by the tub there were loads and loads of syringe-like needles, probably about 10 or 15 of them on the floor, next to some newspaper and string. We moved over to the room with the door, and it seemed like the smell was coming from this room. We opened the door slowly, and it was pretty dark inside, as the window was covered up. There were lots of garbage bags on the floor, and in the corner, there was a sleeping bag that seemed to have something inside of it. We thought that we could see feet popping out of the bottom, so we slowly closed the door and thought that we should probably just leave in case that was actually someone in there. We headed back downstairs, and when we did, we noticed that the basement door was slightly open now. We're almost 100% certain, too, that we had closed it, so we just ran for the window. As we were climbing out, we heard something smash inside, so we started running and we just didn't look back. When I think back to this day now, I realize that what we did was pretty stupid. It could have been a very close call with someone dangerous. I just finished my shift working as a receptionist for a gym. I worked the opening shift, so I was there from 4:30 a.m. until around 11 a.m. I hadn't slept at all the night before, so I decided to order an Uber so that I could get home as soon as possible. When I got into the car, he noticed my uniform and started asking me about my work, my boss, my co-workers, my customers. He kept asking if they were fit and good-looking guys and all that sort of stuff. I'm usually okay with a bit of idle chat with Uber drivers, but these 20 questions were a bit much. He then became insistent that I should use my looks to get promoted by flirting with my boss. Said things like, just promise you'll sleep with him if he gives you a raise, and meathead guys are so stupid that they'll do anything for a girl who smiles at them. I made a disgusted face and said that I wasn't interested in sleeping with my boss, trying to deter the conversation. He said, you don't actually have to sleep with him, just get the raise and then if he tries anything, threaten to take him to HR. I kept saying that I wouldn't do anything like that, and I found that kind of thing inappropriate, and he kept insisting that this was the only way to get ahead of my other female co-workers, and if I was a smart woman, I would use the advantages society gave me. At that point, I was completely done listening to him, but wasn't any closer to my home, so I just stopped responding. He then said, "Oh, I get it, you're a good girl type. You're probably just waiting for Prince Charming to take interest in you and beg you to marry him, right?" Again, I just said nothing. I'm not the type to defend myself to someone that I'll never see again. He then went on this rant about how all marriages are a sham and it's impossible for any human to be monogamous with one person because it's just not in our instincts to only sleep with one person, and that I'd be wasting my time being celibate because I should be having sex with as many men as possible since I'm biologically made to breed and take care of children, and I'd feel much more fulfilled if I just did that. And yes, this dude actually said all of that out loud. I could barely believe it myself, and I was there listening to it. We finally made it to my address though, and he turned around and asked if I had an Instagram and if he could follow it, and also asked if I would rate him 5 stars. I told him that I didn't have an Instagram, and I just got out of the car and kept walking up the street past my house until he drove away. I don't know what this guy's problem was, but man, he gave off some really creepy and weird vibes. I'm 28 years old, but when I was about 5 years old, my mum and I lived in this duplex that was off a main road and kind of in a bit of a wooded area. We lived on one side, and on the other was a woman and her son there. He was studying to be a teacher, I think. My mother had me young, so she was about 25, and this guy was in his early 20s. He would often come and talk to my mum, and my mother said that he would ask a lot of questions about me and ask my mother if it would be alright for him to take me for walks in the woods. Obviously, my mother always declined. My mother worked in the operating room at the local hospital and was on call a lot, so most weekends I just stayed at my grandma's house anyway. But one night, while I was at my grandma's house, my mum was home alone sleeping, and she woke up in the middle of the night and said that she doesn't remember if she heard something or felt someone in the room, but she woke up, and she could see feet wearing socks sticking out from the end of her bed. She grabbed her bedside lamp and was about to hit the intruder when our neighbor yelled her name and said his name. And he couldn't explain why he was naked and only wearing socks, but he begged my mother to not tell his mother about it. My mother, of course, called the cops. She ended up going to court and making a victim impact statement against this guy because she was terrified that he'd become a teacher and be around children. And she says that she's pretty sure that he was there for me that night, and is so happy that I wasn't actually there. And we ended up moving immediately after this because she just couldn't stay another night in that house. So I've lived in a small town in Kentucky for pretty much my entire life, and because of that, I've been surrounded by the mountains and the woods for years. My current house is literally nestled into the woods in the middle of nowhere, and thus outdoor activities have taken up a huge chunk of my time, especially in the summer and the fall. I'm in the woods almost daily, hiking to the creeks to fish or meadows to hunt, and I know the woods and trails around my home like the back of my hand. That said, there is definitely something that calls to you while you're in those woods, especially when you're alone, and I've just now realized it after stumbling upon some of these stories. Before, I would always just brush it off, but nowadays, it's really hard for me to ignore it. So my parents began allowing me to hike alone when I was around 13, but I didn't really get into it until about 2 years later when I was 15. Even then, though, I wasn't allowed to go very far, and I always had to carry a walkie-talkie with me so I could contact my family if necessary. Later, at 17, I'd be allowed to carry a handgun with me, but that's neither here or there. There's some stories that I could tell at that age too, but this one takes place when I was 15. Before I get into it though, I should mention that I have 2 outside dogs, Max, a black lab, and Bo, a beagle. I've had both since I was very young, and they're super smart dogs, always staying by my side when I'm in the woods too. And they always listen to me. Until this day, that is. So I was hiking a trail that runs up beyond my aunt's house, one that I'd hike day in and day out, just kind of out and about, enjoying the woods. It was in October, so the weather was cool, not hot, and I'd been hiking for around an hour at this point. The trail comes out at a spring that runs down from the top of this particular mountain. It hadn't rained lately, so the spring was mostly dry and covered in leaves. I remember looking up the mountain, which I'd never hiked to the top of before, and just feeling this strange call. It wasn't really a voice, but it was just kind of an urge that I couldn't ignore. Keep in mind, too, that I'm a very timid person, and hiking unfamiliar trails on my own freaks me out even to this day. But that day, all my fear just had dissipated for some reason. The only way I can really describe it is that all thought of danger just left my head, and I just climbed higher and higher, and my dogs followed me. I don't even know how to describe the feeling that came over me, but I remember just staring down at my feet and feeling a peace as I climbed. There was a moment when I paused to look out at the houses below. I'd never been that high up before, I remembered, and I felt amazed. I took a picture on my phone, and then I looked around for my dogs, and Bo had already run off and Max was following. I called to them frantically to stop, but they just didn't listen. They disappeared. And at this point, looking down the mountainside, I just suddenly became very afraid. And I looked back uphill, and it just came over me again, and I kept hiking. I couldn't stop, and eventually I heard my walkie-talkie crackle. Everything was distorted, and I couldn't make out any of the words. I assume now that I was just out of range for it to pick up, but back then, it really freaked me out. Whatever had come over me lost its hold on my mind, though, and my dogs were still gone. Panicked, I began running downhill. It's a wonder I didn't get hurt. I was running that quickly. As I neared the wide section of the spring near the bottom, my walkie-talkie picked up, and I heard my dogs running downhill behind me. I got home eventually, and I mostly just forgot about it. I just told myself that I'd almost been lost and to just be more careful. Flash forward many years to now, though, and I still hike. I commented a short version of this second story in another place, but I'll add it here too. So at this point, Max is very old and no longer hikes with me, so it's just me and Bo. Last year, I hiked up to a cave behind my house, as I've done a million times before, and then I started following a trail that I'd never fully explored, just kind of out of curiosity. Bo was ahead of me per usual, but when I called her back, she came. We hiked for the better part of 45 minutes, following a pretty simple trail, and then I figured I'd better be heading back because it was beginning to get dark. And yet, I just couldn't stop. I kept telling myself that I'd just go a little bit further, see just a little bit more, and I remember looking back down at my feet, just like before, and listening to the silence of the woods around me, and just feeling that same peace again. It felt so easy to just keep going deeper and deeper, and so difficult to just turn around. Bo must have felt the call too, because even after I did break out of it and turned around, only after stumbling on a root, and then called back to her, she just wouldn't stop. I had to actually catch up with her and physically turn her around and put her before me so that she would follow me again. Now, I don't really know what the heck is going on out in those woods, but it's been on my mind a lot lately. I mean, what if I hadn't actually stumbled on that route? Or what if my mum hadn't decided to contact me on that static radio at that moment? How deep would I have actually hiked? And what was waiting for me in those depths? I don't know what's out there, but I know this. Those woods, they call to us. This happened about 10 odd years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. So, I lived with my boyfriend back then in a single-story terraced house. The front of this house is facing a small field, and beyond the field is a forest. And our room is adjacent to the front door, and so we have a window in our room which faces the field and the forest. In our room, our bed is placed beside the window in a way that the field and the forest is to our left side. Now, one night, we're sleeping soundly when I suddenly was just jolted awake for no reason at all. Usually when you're jolted awake suddenly in the middle of your sleep, you feel kind of confused and groggy and fall right back to sleep and probably don't remember that you woke up at all. But when I was jolted awake that night, I remember very clearly that I was wide awake straight away and I'm really alert of my surroundings and remember finding it very strange why I suddenly was just so awake. And I glanced at the clock, remembering the time was 3 a.m., 3 a.m. on the dot in fact, and my boyfriend is still sleeping soundly beside me. Then, as I lie back down to try to go back to sleep, is when I heard this loud, eerie, unearthly screeching woman voice coming from the forest or the field or somewhere in that direction. I can't really explain how it sounds like, but it was very, very unsettling, unlike anything that I've ever heard before in my life. It started from the field, my left side, and continued on coming nearer towards our house. But then, the strangest thing happens. It goes over our house and then slowly faded away as it goes further away at my right side. And a second after the screeching voice stopped, all of the dogs in our neighborhood just started howling at the same time. I was frozen in fear and my mind just couldn't comprehend what the hell I just heard. And eventually I just kind of laid there and kind of fell back to sleep. My boyfriend never awoke from the sound, and the next morning I asked him if he actually heard anything strange during the night, and he said no and that he slept soundly throughout the night. Until now, I really can't explain what I heard that night, but the fact that the dogs started howling at the same time makes me confident that I actually heard something, which is really creepy. Also, for the people who are going to say inevitably that it was a fox, it's definitely not, because I'm from Malaysia and we don't have foxes here. It was definitely not a mountain lion too, and also when I mentioned forest, it's more like a small wooded area. It's a bit of a bad description, but it's the best that I can think of, but beyond the wooded area are even more houses, so this wooded area is actually kind of surrounded by houses. I actually live in a city, and what I heard sounded nothing like all the videos that people have sent me before. Whatever it was screeching for a good 5 to 8 seconds, just non-stop, and very clearly too, because the sound in the air just flew right over my roof, above my head. So I'm a light sleeper, and the softest noises will have me up and awake. My girlfriend, experiencing her second nightmare of the night, was softly moaning, so I turned over in my bed to gently wake her up. But that's when I noticed her standing by the window that is set up near her side of the bed, facing a mirror that is on the adjacent wall. I couldn't make out any particular features besides her very distinguishable messy bun that she had worn to bed, as it was pretty dark in my room and there was not a lot of light shining through the closed blinds of the window. But I realized that something was still very off, as I would have definitely noticed if she would have gotten out of bed. I stared at what I thought to be my girlfriend, and it didn't move or make any sounds, but I could still hear the sounds of my girlfriend having a nightmare, and suddenly realized that she was actually right next to me, laying in the bed. At that very terrifying realization, I said, "What the hell?" and quickly reached to turn my lamp on. But as soon as the light came on, the figure just vanished. So I turned my focus to my girlfriend, who was just waking up from her nightmare, calming her down and explaining what I had just saw. And now we're awake, just searching the internet and trying to think of a rational explanation besides sleep paralysis, because I was definitely awake at the time that I spotted the figure. My girlfriend is joking that we need a blessing of the house because, yes, it's haunted. We've both experienced strange things happening since I moved into this house last year, but it was built in 2006, so it's not that old. Also, a few months ago, she, despite being a very rational individual, also heard male voices laughing, whispering, and thumping sounds coming outside of my kitchen window when I was away on a business trip, and almost called the cops that day, despite me having a state-of-the-art security system and there being no sign of anyone being in the house with her besides my dog, who was asleep at her feet. I've also experienced finding doors open in my home that I know for an absolute fact that I had shut before. But my house just doesn't feel organized unless all the doors are shut, so this was pretty unsettling to me. My fire alarm went off as well, one beep, despite there being no fire and having new batteries. I don't know, but do you guys have any ideas about what might be going on? We're both minor believers of the paranormal, but want to find a rational explanation as to what these experiences were, and especially curious as to what the figure by my window could have been. Does this mean that I have 2 girlfriends now? I'm actually going to a church tomorrow too, and I'm going to ask a priest if they can bless my house. I hung a cross next to my window too, where I saw it standing, but thinking more and more about everything, my dog was actually whining most of that night. My girlfriend's puppy is still in training, so we have her puppy in a crate, and my dog was sleeping in the hallway. Oh, and on our drive home from dinner, I remember that I had 2 other experiences like this when I was a little kid. A brief overview, but I woke up in the middle of the night and got out of bed to use the bathroom. I stopped in my doorway and looked to my left, and my sister was in her doorway, and my dad came sprinting around the corner. I got pushed back into my room by this thing, and I saw it run downstairs. A few months after that, I was visiting family in Ohio, and we went for a walk. I was just kind of straggling behind, and I looked over my shoulder, and on the top of the hill, I saw the same thing. It had the silhouette of a human, but there was just absolutely no color to it, like it was completely solid black. And last night was the first time that I've seen this thing since I was a kid. My mum's side of the family used to have a small cabin in the woods in the Pocono Mountains, surrounded by trees. But it wasn't like a fancy cabin or anything with a hot tub. More like a very small hunting cabin built by my late grandfather and my uncles as well. It had a small porch with a picnic bench, a gravel lot to park in, and there maybe 15 feet away a nice-sized fire pit with a bench and a few logs around it. The driveway was a very long drive up the side of a mountain off a very secluded highway. The house was small, but the land they owned was pretty big. We had a neighbor too, but he was maybe half a mile away. Maybe a bit closer, I'm not too sure, but we couldn't see them through the woods and rarely heard them except for maybe some gunshots during hunting season. You could hear the occasional car on the highway, but otherwise, the house was just kind of in the middle of nowhere. So, we used to always spend time up there when we were younger with all of our cousins. However, just me and my family would go up every once in a while in the summer too. We would go hiking and visit the local amusement park, and have big bonfires and roast marshmallows and cook burgers. And at night, we would walk further down the driveway towards the highway, where the trees weren't as close together so we could see the stars. And without all that light pollution, you could seriously see just about everything. And all in all, it was just a great time. Anyway, so one summer when I was maybe 13, our family of 5 took a trip up there, my family being me, my 2 older sisters, my mum and my dad. I used to be, still am, afraid of the dark, and especially the woods in the dark. So I would really only go outside if one of my siblings or parents were with me, which they usually were. Now one night, we light the bonfire and we're talking and roasting marshmallows and enjoying the summer night. I was pretty tired from whatever we had done earlier in the day, so I decided to join my mum inside on the couch. I ended up falling asleep in the living room. I woke up, I can only assume a few hours later, upset that I fell asleep and missed the rest of the fire. I pulled aside the curtains to check if anyone was still outside. From the window, I can see the fire pit clearly still ablaze, and what I assume is my dad sitting on the bench by himself out there. Not wanting my dad to be alone, I decided that I would go and join him. Now, I am not lying when I say that I sincerely hate the dark. Even though the fire pit wasn't terribly far, that walk still felt long in the pitch black. I don't know what possessed me to go outside without looking for any other members of my family, or even checking the time. But I opened the door and I stepped out onto the porch and called to my dad to ask why he's still there. The pit was maybe 15-20 feet away, but he would have heard me in the night for sure. I can clearly see the fire pit, and I can clearly see my dad, even though he was sitting on the bench on the opposite side of the fire. Confused though, I start to walk down the steps and then slowly towards the fire pit, asking my dad why he wasn't responding. as I get closer and as I keep calling for him, I realize that while I should be hearing the roar of the fire, there's just absolute and complete ringing silence. And then I notice that there's no one sitting on the bench anymore. At this point, I'm only a few feet away from the fire and the bench. My blood immediately turned ice cold, and I whipped around and sprinted back up to the house, not daring to stop or look behind me. I locked the door and ran into my dad's bedroom, only to find him under his blankets, asleep. I didn't want to wake him up to let him know how stupid I was, but I just crawled under the covers beside him and I prayed to just fall asleep. The next morning, I told my parents what happened. My mum keeps telling me that it was just a dream, but I woke up from a dream on the couch right before and then went outside when this all happened. I used to have the same reoccurring dream every time that we went up to that cabin, and I would only have that dream when I was at the cabin. I specifically remember having this very same dream again and then waking up on the couch. This same creepy dream is the same reason I always slept next to my dad anytime that we stayed at the mountains too. I never felt safe sleeping by myself. That meant that my mum would share a bed with my older sister, but they both snored, so it was fine. But my dad tells me that it's just not possible, because he always deadbolts the door before he goes to sleep, and there was no way that I would have been able to push the deadbolt open without waking him up. And two, because he always puts the fire out before bed as well. Basic fire safety, which I get. All I know is that I know what I saw, and I know that it wasn't a dream. And all I can hope for is that you guys also don't think that I'm crazy. I always wonder how close I was to getting murdered that day. My ex-boyfriend and I used to be co-workers. Yeah, I know. And every day after work, we'd go to this empty parking lot 15 minutes away from work to have a smoke before he dropped me home. Well, we were pretty young, so we didn't really have a lot of other places to hang out. Well, we were standing outside and leaning on the driver's side of the car. It was pretty dark out, and the plaza lights sort of faded away, so you couldn't see beyond a certain point. We started to get lost in our conversation and weren't paying attention to our surroundings. We came here every day, and nothing unusual happened in the past. But as we're talking, we notice a guy coming out of the dark, and he was walking or jogging pretty fast. And before we had a chance to react, he was already pretty close to us, and he was dressed in oversized clothes and had a backpack. I'll call him X. So everyone was silent at first. My ex and I were pretty much frozen and were already thinking of a plan to escape in case anything happened. We didn't want to make any sudden movements, but my ex secretly slipped me the keys to his car, assuming that he wanted me to casually walk to the passenger side and get in the driver's seat so that we could leave ASAP. As soon as I tried to move, though, X said, "Please stay where you are." He seemed emotional. He seemed kind of frantic, and he was a mix between anxious, impulsive, and kind of confident. He asked, "Can I borrow one of your phones?" My ex and I both said that we don't have our phones. I said that I hadn't paid my bill, so mine isn't functional. He said, while almost tearing up, "You expect me to believe both of you don't have a phone? This is the type of crap I'm talking about. I hate being lied to." Then he really started breaking down. He said, "I just did the most fucked up thing. You don't know what I've just been through." We honestly thought that he was on drugs or something, but he started crying and he's like, "I just had to kill my own best friend, my brother." Then he said, "I'm going to ask again, do you have a phone?" I said that I had a phone, but it's not working, which was the truth because I paid my bill late. He was like, "Don't make me do this, and I really don't want to." Then he reaches for his backpack. That's when both me and my ex realized that this might be our last day on Earth. But X said one thing that sparked something in my ex, and he said, "I'm a fucked up person. God's never going to forgive me." My ex wasn't religious, but he came from a Catholic family. He started talking, trying to calm this guy down. It was almost like a hostage negotiation or something. My ex was like, "Remember God, man. You can always repent and be forgiven. God will forgive you." And this guy just started crying and dropped to his knees and dropped his bag. I took this chance to run to the passenger side, get in the driver's seat, reverse, and flung the passenger door open for my ex. And we just drove off as fast as we could. On the way home, we were obviously shaken, kind of in disbelief. I called the police and explained the situation. The police caught up to us and asked us for his description. And they said that they just received a call about someone with a similar description, but didn't tell us the reason. To this day, I'm really not sure if he was actually telling the truth, or if he was on drugs, or what was in his bag. My life definitely flashed for a moment, but we searched the news every day for a month for a similar incident, and we didn't find one about a man shot and injured in that area on the exact same date as the incident. So we can never really be sure, I suppose, and I guess I never really want to find out anyway. So this story takes place during the summer when I was 15. It's a true story about a small encounter that I had. So, I was living with my dad and my stepmother at the time. I remember my stepmother throwing a royal fit about buying me new school clothes because I had let a few pairs of pants get holes in them and still wore them. It was my first year of going into high school, and I wasn't about to let her spoil that for me, so I went to stay with my grandparents for the summer to earn some money. They live in a remote, small area that was once home to Native American tribes. It's very secluded despite being a mile or so from the highway, and it's all lush, gorgeous forest. My grandpa had built his own 3-story house there too, and a shop as well where he cut and assembled cedar into roofing products. And that was where I came in, hauling heavy chunks of cedar to his van, stacking, nailing, cinching up shaken shingle into bundles to be sold, and I made good money while there and was able to buy pretty much an entire new wardrobe, in fact. But as summer was coming to an end and it was just too hot to work, I decided to take a walk one day. Now, let me say that I spent my childhood roaming these woods, armed with my grandparents' 2 dogs. We ran and played and napped all day, and I had never seen anything out of the ordinary, or gotten any sort of weird vibes. But I waited until it was a bit cooler in the evening, and I started out, walking a little path that would take me to an old unused logging road. And I had tread this same path so many times that I wasn't even paying attention until I just all of a sudden felt like I was being watched. I would like to note here too that I was young at the time. I had yet to touch any drugs or alcohol, and I had no history of hallucination or mental illness, or anything along those lines. But what I saw, it still haunts me to this day. Because there he was, standing naked in the middle of my path, looking down at me with a blank expression. He was tall, maybe 7 feet, much taller than my 5 nothing. He had long, matted black and grey hair, and there were tufts of it growing from the sides of his arms and legs as well. There were no genitals, only smooth flesh where they should be, and his skin, it was such a sickly pale yellow and looked to be just too big for stature and hung in some spots. We made eye contact, and his yellow orbs felt like they were staring right into my soul. I couldn't move or think, and everything had gone silent around me. And the next 10 or so seconds of my life just seemed to really stretch out. But we just stood there, looking at one another before he swiftly turned and just walked back into the trees. But the foliage went undisturbed as he kind of melted through it and disappeared. I honestly expected him to charge at me, or at least be intimidating, but he just turned and left. And I haven't seen him since either, nor am I too enthusiastic to go out looking, that's for sure. I remember telling my grandma about it, but she told me that it was probably just some drug addict, as the area that she lives in has a very high number of users and manufacturers of methamphetamines. I've told this story in a thread somewhere before, but I've never really gone out of my way to share it, particularly because I know it sounds a bit made up. I've tried looking into Native American folklore, especially the local stuff, but I haven't found anything matching that description. If you actually listen to this all the way through, though, thank you. I appreciate the thought that somebody else out there knows about it now. And if you have any ideas about what this particular thing might have been, please let me know, because I would love to hear your thoughts. I really can't find a reasonable explanation for what happened that night. It was just a strange and really alarming experience. It all happened a few months ago. My friend had heard that the northern lights might be visible in our area and asked if I wanted to go for a drive and to the country to see if we could catch a glimpse. So we headed out after dark and we drove for a few hours, just searching for a good vantage point basically. But after a while, we started to give up on seeing the lights. My friend realized, though, that we were close to her hometown, and noted that she'd been waiting to visit the local cemetery to find the graves of some of her distant relatives. She had recently been researching her genealogy and whatnot. It was a clear and warm night, and we were both a little bit disappointed that we hadn't seen the lights yet. We both wanted to make the trip worthwhile, so we agreed to swing by the cemetery. We found the graves, took some photos, and just wandered around for a little bit. My friend was leading the way, using the flashlight on her phone to light the path and ensure that we didn't accidentally step on any of the graves. I'd been feeling increasingly anxious since we arrived, which struck me as odd. I've done several cemetery projects as an archaeologist and don't normally feel nervous in cemeteries, even at night. In fact, I usually find that cemeteries are pretty peaceful and calming. But I just felt really strange in that cemetery and found myself frequently spinning around because I just felt like someone was standing behind me. Still, I just chalked it up to general anxiety and tried to not dwell on it. One of the many problems with having anxiety disorder is that it's sometimes hard to tell when your nervousness is justified. Even in retrospect, I don't know if my anxiety was just in my head or if it was related to what would happen next. But after wandering for a while, we realized that it was approaching 1 a.m. and that we should probably get back home. We headed toward the car. The car was in sight, and my friend was a few yards ahead of me when it happened. I just suddenly got that nervous feeling again and thought that I had heard someone running up behind me. I was starting to turn my head to look back when I felt something collide with my back, right between my shoulder blades. There was a weight behind it, as if someone had actually hurtled into me. The impact was so forceful that I was thrown forward and fell flat on my face, and as I scrambled to get back up, I felt the weight hitting me in the shoulders again and was shoved back down. I glanced up to see my friend running toward me, as she had also heard someone running up to us, had heard my initial fall, and had turned just in time to see me being pushed back down. She would later tell me that she had seen my hoodie flattening against my back and shifting, as if someone had been pressing their hands against my shoulders. She grabbed my arm to pull me up just as the weight disappeared, and we both just bolted for the car, jumping in and instinctively locking all the doors. She wasted no time too, starting the engine and then hastily just peeling out of the driveway. And as soon as we hit the road, we just sped away from there. We drove several minutes, just kind of not saying a word. I think we were both just kind of stunned and, more than anything, really confused. She finally glanced at me and said, "What the hell just happened?" And I didn't know quite how to answer that. I told her that someone had shoved me to the ground, and she said, "I know, I saw, but what was that? There was nothing there." We tried to come up with some sort of a rational explanation, but none of them made any sense. Had someone ambushed me and then bolted? Definitely not. We would have seen them for sure. Had I tripped? No, I definitely felt something pushing me, and my friend had seen me being shoved back down as well. Had it been the wind? Not possible. There hadn't been so much as a breeze that night. Perhaps an animal had attacked me, but that didn't seem possible either. I mean, there were no local animals large enough, strong enough, and stealthy enough to topple a full-grown human without being seen like that. Plus, I had been in full view of my friend, illuminated by a flashlight during the second fall, and the weight had remained on my shoulders even as she was coming right up to me. She should have been able to see whatever had been pushing me, but there was just nothing there. In the end, we just couldn't explain it, but whatever had pushed me twice, it hadn't been visible to us. And as the adrenaline faded, I noticed something else as well. My back really hurt. Right between my shoulder blades, right where I had felt the impact, I could feel a sort of stinging or prickling sensation. It felt like my back had been brushed with stinging nettles. I mentioned this to my friend, and she insisted on pulling over to look at my back. She switched the hood light on and pulled the collar of my hoodie down to take a look, and I heard her mutter, "What the hell?" The skin between my shoulder blades was reddened, and several little blisters had started to appear as well. They later swelled up and popped, and it was as if I'd gotten sunburn or a chemical burn. There weren't any scratches or cuts. It was a relatively subtle mark, but it was still clearly there. And we certainly couldn't figure out how I'd gotten burned like that. I hadn't rubbed up against anything, I hadn't touched my back, I'd been wearing my hoodie all night, and there were no tears or marks in the fabric. And man, did it hurt. It continued to sting for several days, in fact, and it was really uncomfortable. In fact, I couldn't even sleep that night. My back hurt, and every time I started to drift off, I'd suddenly sense that someone was standing over my shoulder, and I would startle awake. I couldn't really understand what had happened at the cemetery, but it truly rattled me. I don't know if I believe in things like ghosts or demons, to be honest, but I know that something truly bizarre and frightening happened that night, and my inability to explain it, to account for every strange little detail, was deeply disturbing to me. It's been really difficult to grapple with this. I mean, I already have PTSD from a previous assault, and there is something profoundly unsettling about the fact that, in this instance, there's nothing that I could have done to defend myself. And with no clear explanation for it, there's no way for me to prevent something like this from happening again. I've had several nightmares since then as well, dreams that are similar to the nightmares that I'd had for years when I was growing up. I don't know where they came from, but for as long as I can remember, I've had dreams in which a creature is attempting to lure me in one way or another, and in the dreams I usually understand this creature to be a devil or a demon. Sometimes it takes the form of an old woman. I had a dream when I was about 13 years old in which I was wandering through a forest, and I came across a little cottage with this old woman standing by the porch. She beckoned me inside, and I acquiesced, and we spent some time casually talking and baking cookies, but I just felt uneasy around her and got the sense that she wanted something from me. At one point, I glanced out the window, and I noticed a group of people just standing in the yard, calling out to the old woman. I asked who these people were, and I vividly remember what she told me. They want me to take them in, but I don't want them. I want you. In other dreams, it's had a more sinister appearance, but I always recognize it as the same creature. I sometimes have dreams in which it's sitting in the dark at my bedside, whispering to me. It has a shadowy appearance with long, lanky limbs and empty eye sockets. Its teeth are made of razor wire or something, and there's something like blood or wine gleaming on its lips. In those dreams, I can hear it whispering, but I can't exactly understand what it's saying. Sometimes I have dreams of the same creature sitting in a chair in the corner of my room, eating a rotten apple. I have long suspected that this creature is some sort of a manifestation of my deepest and most troubling fears. And I know that these are just dreams, but I mention it because those dreams had subsided in my early 20s, but the incident at the cemetery rattled me so much that they've kind of returned. This whole experience seems to have shaken my understanding of the world around me, opening the floodgates to my own inner demons. In these new dreams, the creature is standing upright behind me at the cemetery. Time seems to be slowing down. I can see my friend frozen ahead of me, and the creature is whispering at my back. I really don't know why my mind is conflating that dream creature with my encounter at the cemetery, but the fear has increasingly kept me up at night. Anyway, I just wanted to share this because I have no idea what the hell happened that night. My friend believes that it was a ghost, but I don't know. I've just never personally experienced anything like this, and I really don't know what to do about it. But thanks for listening, and hopefully soon I can figure this out. My dad told me about this incident that happened in the early 50s when he was a young child. I'm sharing it here with how it was relayed to me. So, it was in the early 50s. My dad couldn't have been much older than 5 or 6 years old when it happened. He grew up on a large family farm that was fairly isolated. The nearest neighborhood was at least a quarter mile away through rolling wooded hills. There was no electric service on the farm back then, and they didn't get phones until the summer of 1984, so they were effectively on their own. One day, Grandpa had sent my uncle to the feed mill to collect payment for that year's harvest. He was told to get it in cash. Grandpa wanted to pay that year's taxes and then deposit the rest in the bank. My uncle brought the money home, and that night at around 2 a.m., they were awakened by a car parked on the property with its headlights aimed at the house. Grandpa rolled out of bed and crawled along the floor to my uncle and Dad's bedroom and woke my uncle up. In almost complete darkness, they ran down the stairs. My uncle ran out the back door and Grandpa ran out of the front. Grandpa threw the front door open and ran outside so fast that he pretty much leapt over the back steps and went to confront the guy. The driver of the car was already most of the way to the house. He saw Grandpa coming with my uncle close behind, and he turned and hauled ass. And Grandpa wasn't far behind. He made it to his car and he was trying to drive away, and Grandpa was grabbing the steering wheel, trying to stop him. But eventually he managed to break loose, and Grandpa chased him a short distance down the road, but he finally got away. At that point, Grandpa and my uncle noticed a second car at the end of the block speeding away as well. The intruders had managed to get away that night, but thankfully no one was hurt. The next day, Grandpa and my uncle reported what had happened to the sheriff, and the sheriff pretty much succinctly told them to buy some rifles, because if it happens again, do what you have to do to defend yourselves. And the next stop they made was to the hardware store to buy said rifles, one for each of my uncles and one for my grandpa. There was never a repeat of the incident, as far as my dad knows, and the late night visitors were never caught. This happened a few years ago when I was still living with my mum, and I had borrowed her car to go see my boyfriend for the evening. It was around midnight when I got back to my neighborhood, so the roads were pretty much empty. And that's when I noticed this dirty, run-down, rusted white utility van that my maintenance guy would drive, following me. I never saw the driver's face, but I got this immediate sinking feeling in my stomach because something just felt wrong about this van. Now, I was only 20 at the time, but I knew better than to just drive straight to my house and letting this person know exactly where I live, no matter how desperately I wanted to just go home and ignore it. But I also wasn't 100% sure that they were actually following me yet. I didn't want to jump to conclusions just because it was late and I was alone and being paranoid and all that. So I drove to a shopping complex a few minutes out of the way that's well lit and has a public library to see if I was followed there. I thought that I lost the van, but decided to wait in the parking lot for a few minutes because I just had a bad feeling that I just couldn't shake. Sure enough, the van showed up and was driving in just random circles around the parking lot, looking for me by the looks of things. That scared me quite a bit, so I drove towards the big mall here that's always got security or police presence because it was the midway point between where I was and where I lived. I parked in a very well-lit, although empty, 24-hour McDonald's parking lot where I had a great view of the roads and the mall, but I wasn't super easy to spot as well. And I just waited to see if the van showed up looking for me. And it did. And of course, this would be the one time security and the cops are nowhere to be found, which was half the reason I decided to head there in the first place. Realizing that whoever was driving this van was 100% actively following me in the middle of the night, I knew that driving home was not an option, and that's a terrifying realization. Luckily, the police station is just a few minutes away from where I was, so I try and discreetly drive away, hoping the van hasn't noticed me yet. I wasn't that lucky because it wasn't long before the van was back in my rearview mirror. At this point, I'm panicking pretty hard and my anxiety is really high. I finally pulled into the police station parking lot, and seconds later, the van came to a stop in the middle of the road for no more than a few seconds. I'm guessing just long enough for them to realize where I led them, and they just took off immediately, pretty quickly as well. I did make it home safe and without seeing the van again not long after, but this whole ordeal took up at least an hour of my night. It was after 1 a.m. by the time that I made it home, and I was pretty much terrified the whole night. I don't know what this guy's specific intention was, but honestly, I don't need to know. I know that it was nothing good and that I likely avoided a very bad situation. If you think that someone is following you, it's not stupid or paranoid to make sure that you aren't right, because who knows what might have happened if I had led them to my house or gotten out of my car. So me and my friend Jacob go out biking in a forest near my house because it's pretty big and it has some nice trails. We'd been biking around for, I'd say about an hour when we realized that we were actually kind of lost. So we stopped to try and figure out where we were at. He was trying the map app on his phone when I noticed a house not too far off the trail. My friend's phone wasn't having any luck with connecting, so we decided to walk over to the house to check if someone could point us in the right direction. We knocked on the door and, honestly, just like a horror movie, and I know that's cliche, but this is exactly what happened. The door just creaked open by itself. Well, we walked in asking if anyone was there, and then we realized that the place was empty. It was mostly furnished, but it looked pretty old, and the fridge was rancid. My friend finds a staircase leading up to a floor, and we decided to go up and check that part of the place out. The second that I put my foot on that staircase, I felt just nauseous. I almost fell over because of just how bad I felt, in fact, and my friend helps me make it out of the place, but I collapse outside on the ground and I start vomiting just violently. My friend is trying to help me from falling into my vomit, and once I was done, I sat back up and I just tried to get some air. And that was when my friend turned around and just mumbled, "Holy crap, dude." I turned around at this and the entire house was gone. Like, there wasn't even dirt and stuff that proved the house even existed. I mean, it looked like the house was never even there in the first place. There was even a tree growing in a spot where the corner of the place was. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there just staring at the ground. That was when I realized that I'd taken a picture of the place on my phone, so I pulled that out trying to see if I'd actually taken a picture or not, and it was just a picture of the ground just covered in dead leaves and grass. We decided that moving was better than staying there, and after probably half an hour or so, we found our way back to the trails that we knew. I've got no idea what the hell that was, but I'm wondering, has anyone else seen anything like this? I can't be the only one, right? If you guys have had any similar experiences or know of any similar stories, I would love to hear them, so please let me know in the comments section below. Oh, and I actually returned there not too long ago trying to get some pictures for you guys, but after what happened when we tried going back to find the spot, I honestly just don't think that it's worth the risk anymore. This is because we went into the forest at maybe 11 or 11:20ish a.m. We looked about for what could have only been about 2 hours tops, and we left because we were starting to get hungry. He turns on his car and we both immediately noticed that the time read 5 p.m, which means that we were in there for roughly 6 hours, and yet we barely felt it. So since then, me and my friend have pretty much agreed to forget it ever happened in the first place, and just steer clear of that forest entirely. At age 14, my parents sent me to a military school in Virginia for pretty much bad behavior. Cadets stayed at the school throughout the school year except for a few weekends and holiday leaves and whatnot. The school opened in 1898, and many buildings on the campus have been around for well over 100 years, like the barracks that I slept in, though several buildings throughout the years had burned down, like one such occurrence when an accidental fire burned down the Delta Company barracks in 1924. But the academic building was built around 1915. It was 2 stories tall, with the second floor being full of classrooms. But my experience took place on the first floor, which featured a handful of offices for facility officers, a computer lab as well, and a large room that had 2 large swinging doors that opened into a study hall meant to accommodate roughly 75 students at any given time. But one aspect of my new life as a cadet was called guard duty. And every day, 3 cadets were randomly selected to be on guard duty. The guards had to wake up an hour earlier than everyone else at 5 a.m, and you'd wake up, get dressed in uniform, and meet the other 2 guards at the academic hall. Once the guards got to the building, they were supposed to do a walkthrough on both floors to make sure nothing was out of place and check that nobody was inside. After the walkthrough, you'd sit by the phone in the first floor hallway and take calls from anyone happening to call in. So I had been at the boarding school for a few months when I was assigned my first guard duty. So the next morning, I woke up early and I got dressed as quietly as possible to avoid waking my roommate. It was pouring outside, so I put on my rain jacket on top of my uniform and walked through the dark to the academic building. Usually guards would meet up outside the building, but since it was raining hard, I just decided to go inside by myself. I waited inside the dark building for the other guards to show up, and after about 10 minutes, I started to get worried because they still had not shown up, and I was concerned that a facility officer might come early and see that I had not done my job. So I walked up the stairs and checked every classroom and also the creepy bathroom that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1940s, and nothing was out of place. So I made my way downstairs to check the offices, the study hall, and other rooms. I thoroughly opened every door and walked through every room. Once again, nothing was out of place and no one was inside. In fact, everything seemed pretty much in order in the dark building. And so I sat down in the hallway next to the phone. But after a few minutes, I felt the weirdest sensation. The building had begun to kind of shake softly. I could feel the vibrations in my body and see the small table next to me shake ever so much. I sat there completely frightened by whatever was occurring in front of my eyes. But the rumbling abruptly stopped a few moments later, and I took a big sigh of relief. But then I started hearing noises from the study hall room, the doors to which were only 10 feet away from me. It started off just barely legible, and I couldn't tell what I was hearing from that room, though it seemed like it was getting louder, and soon I started to hear what sounded like whispering. It kept getting louder and louder until I could hear what sounded like dozens and dozens of voices inside the room. And after a few moments, I could actually hear what they were saying. But it was as if many conversations were taking place all at once in a kind of chaotic sense, and I could hear laughter and comments like, "Pass me the answers to the math homework," and stuff like that. This was a room that I'd just been in a short while ago, and there was no other entrance into it, other than the swinging doors that I was sitting right next to. It had been completely empty short of all the desks and other items throughout the room, but now I was hearing what I can only describe as a room full of voices. I sat there paralyzed with fear while hearing all of this, and then I began to also hear a tapping noise coming from around the room. It sounded almost as if someone was hitting a ruler against a desk. The tapping sound began to move around the room while all the other voices continued, when suddenly the tapping stopped. But what was so much worse was that I heard something scream, "Sit down and shut up, it's study time." It was incredibly loud and unmistakably like an instructor was in there screaming at a room full of cadets. As soon as whoever or whatever finished screaming, the study hall fell completely silent. I sat in my chair wanting to bolt out of the building, but I was honestly just too scared to move. Plus, I'd have to pass by the doorway to the study hall to actually get out of the building. But my heart was pounding in my chest and I was breathing incredibly hard. I was terrified that whatever was in that room would realize that I was there. And then the building softly began to shake again, almost as if whatever was taking place was coming to an end. A few minutes passed as I sat there in my chair in silence. I couldn't hear anything anymore coming from the study hall, and I began to feel slightly better about the circumstances, though I still had not built up the nerve to actually make a run for it yet. But then, the building started to shake again, and I could hear the ruler tapping noise start up again in the room. And this time, it was clear that it was making its way to the door that led to me. It was moving fast and growing louder. It had almost gotten to the swinging doors when I sprang up without thinking, and my survival instincts kicked in, and I sprinted out of the building as fast as I had ever run before. Now, Outside, I made my way through the dark back to my barracks, and just as I was getting near the barracks, one of the guards was sleepily walking out of the barracks, and the other students were all still fast asleep. I calmed my nerves and I walked up to him. He hadn't seen me running in the rain yet, and for some reason I didn't tell him what I had experienced. I walked with him back to the academic building as he explained how he had overslept, and we walked inside. He made a beeline to the study hall room, opened the swinging doors, walked in, and tossed his backpack onto his assigned desk. I followed him inside, apprehensively, and when I got in, the room was still empty. So, to start off, this is a collection of stories from my old house that I lived in my entire life, up until 3 years ago. There was a lot that happened to me and my family in the house, but these are the ones that I could think of off the top of my head. So, before I begin, let me explain how my bedroom is set up and give some backstory on my family. My parents used to be paranormal investigators and were a part of a ghost hunting team in Arizona. They had many cases, but actually stopped when they dealt with something so bad that it really messed them up. And so, the paranormal really isn't anything new to us. Growing up, I believed in ghosts because of what I'd seen and learned, but now that I'm an adult, I'm sort of skeptical about everything, though I have had a lot of stuff happen to me that I really can't explain logically. So yeah, this is one of those stories. To explain my house, my bedroom was upstairs. Attached to my bedroom was a Jack and Jill bathroom, connected to my sister's bedroom, both doors locked from inside of the bathroom, and one night my younger sister and I were sitting in my bedroom. I had a bunk bed set up so that the bottom was a desk and I would sleep at the top. At this time I was on the top bunk just playing on my phone, and my little sister was at the desk drawing. At some point though, we started to hear the bathroom doorknob move as if someone was trying to open it, but it couldn't because it was locked. I told my little sister to go and open it because whoever was on the other side was stupid because it locks from that side. She goes over and tells me that the door is locked, and before she got over to the door, it just stopped moving. We just kind of shrugged it off, thinking that it might have been our older sister messing with us, and we went back to doing whatever it was that we were doing. After a while, we decided to head back downstairs. I turned off my lights and I come down off my bunk bed. We started heading down the hallway and I could hear my parents fighting, and so I told my little sister that I'd join her down there in a minute because, to be honest, I didn't want to deal with my parents. So I went over to my older sister's bedroom, assuming she was in there because all of the lights were on from what I could see under a doorway. As I approached the door, I started to hear what sounded like a scrubbing noise. Honestly, the best way I could describe it is like someone was going to town on deep cleaning my bathtub. I thought it was weird since my sister literally doesn't clean anything, especially not our bathtub. I originally went to open a door and it was locked, so I knocked on the door and waited. And nothing. I then banged on the door thinking that she probably just couldn't hear me because of the loud noise coming from the bathroom, and I shouted, "Kaylin, open up. Why are you scrubbing something at like 8 p.m? And I, again, heard no reply. After a few more bangs on the door, I started to get annoyed. That's when the scrubbing sound stopped. Thinking that she was finally coming, I waited by the door when suddenly the door just started shaking as if someone on the other side was scratching at it with both hands, and it was the same noise that I could hear in the bathroom. I could tell that it was shaking too because I could see the light peeking through the openings every time the door was hit. At first, I assumed maybe one of the dogs got locked in there on accident, but then I thought my sister was probably just messing with me, so I banged on the door and yelled something like, "Stop messing around and let me in." The noise continued for maybe a second, and that's when I banged on the door once more, and suddenly everything just stopped. A few seconds of silence, and there was a loud bang on the door in response. I thought at this point, okay, screw this, and slowly backed away. I yelled to my mum, who was downstairs, and said, "Mum, is Kaylin in her room?" And she replied, "No, she's in the garage with the chickens." We had moved our chickens to the garage because it was too cold out for them, and we felt our chicken coop just wasn't good enough to keep them warm. I then ran downstairs as fast as I could and asked, "Are you sure?" And she said, "I don't know, go look." So I did. I opened the door and there she was, sitting on the couch with one of our chickens. I then explained to her everything that happened, and she was just as confused as me, so we decided to head up together to check it out. I told her the door was locked, so she was going to push it open. Her door kind of sucked, so with enough force she could open it, even when locked. She went to push her door open and nearly fell into the room because suddenly her door was just unlocked again. All her lights were on, the closet and the bathroom doors wide open. We kind of just stood there for a moment and wondered what the hell happened. And at that moment, we heard the scraping noise in the bathroom, and we both just ran out and downstairs so fast that my sister slipped and ran into the table because my mum was mopping. So, in the end, we were not really sure what happened, but it never happened again after that. The next story, to give some backstory again, and you can believe it or not, but my sister has always been sensitive to the paranormal. Ever since she was a baby, in fact, because growing up, she'd tell my parents that she had a family friend who passed away, or she would play with our great-grandma Jessie, who passed away when we were babies. Even as a teenager, she would tell us about figures that she would see and stuff like that. But anyway, the story goes like this. My sister comes into my room at night at about 30 minutes after I took a shower. She had come in to yell at me, all my lights were off. So she comes in, yells at me, then goes back into her room. She had heard me laughing from downstairs and yelled down the stairs for me. I replied, and she asked me how long I'd been down there, and I told her about 30 minutes and then asked why. She just went silent and said, "Never mind, but I knew that something was up." She didn't tell me for a few days, even though I kept pressing her about it, and eventually she told me that when she came into my room to yell at me, she saw a figure clear as day laying on my bunk bed. The figure even turned around to look at her as if it was looking over its shoulder while laying on its side. She told me that she didn't want to freak me out because I told her that sometimes when I sleep on my bed, I feel like there's something there with me on the top bunk. And after that, I had sleeping problems, and it really creeped me out. I hated that room, and I hated sleeping in that room, and it just gave me a bad vibe every time I would go in there, and so that really just turned me off from wanting to sleep in there. I 100% believe my sister too, because of the fact that she was so freaked out, she didn't tell me for a few days. I had a lot of things happen to me in this house, and I'm really glad that I don't live there anymore. Now, the next one is a little bit stupid, but it was a big deal to me at the time, and I think it adds to the context. So, the story starts like this. When I was around 16 or 17, I had a bedroom, and in my bedroom was a dresser, my bunk bed, closet and bathroom, and I had a bunch of tacks sitting on my dresser and the plastic case that it came in. At one time, I walked into my bedroom about to head into my bathroom, and the tacks were just all over the floor. I was like, damn it, who knocked this shit onto the floor again, and didn't bother to pick it up. I went to my sister's room. Our bedrooms were connected with the Jack and Jill bathroom, remember? And I thought that maybe she knocked it over while going into her bedroom, since my dresser was right next to my bathroom. So I went in and I asked her, and she said that she hadn't gone into my room all day. I was like, whatever, she's lying because I sure didn't knock it over. But a few days pass and the same thing happens again. A few days later, and the same thing. I come in and the tacks are just all over my floor again. Annoyed, I picked them up and put them into a little glass box that I had so that they wouldn't fall off my dresser again. The next day I come in and my tacks are on the floor again. I was starting to get pissed off at this point because it just kept happening and I thought someone was messing with me. I asked my sister, and she swore that it wasn't her. I asked my mum and my dad, and neither of them knew that I even had tacks in there, so I put them back in the glass box and pushed them to the end of my dresser against the mirror. But, as you've probably ascertained by now, it just kept happening. At first it was every few days, but then it was like once a day, and eventually it happened twice a day. My whole family knew about it too, because I just complained about it so much. We jokingly named it the tack ghost, and I've called it that ever since. Eventually, I kind of got used to it, so when I'd come in, I'd sort of just sigh and outwardly say, "Are you kidding me? Again? Don't you have something better to do?" My family kind of made fun of it and didn't really believe me too much, and I was getting pretty mad. I wanted to test something, so I put my tacks into the glass box once more and I placed a candle on top of it. The next day, I came home from school and guess what? Tacks are all over my bedroom floor, not just in a pile in front of my dresser, and the damn candle is straight across the room with the lid off. I kind of freaked out over this, and I told everyone, and they were like, well, then take them out of the room, but I was determined to prove to them that I wasn't just making it up. So Christmas comes around, and I had a friend who was living with us at the time and told him that we were going to test this stuff out, so he would see that I wasn't lying. After opening presents and cards, I bring all my stuff upstairs and he comes with me. I place some of the heavier items on my dresser and I put my cards and money on top of the pile. I outwardly said, "Don't touch my money," to the ghost, and then I looked at my friend and I said, "We'll come back later and see if anything happens." A few hours pass and we go upstairs to check and nothing had happened. After a little while, I honestly thought that maybe nothing was going to actually happen, until my friend and I go upstairs to check and my money is across the room on the floor. Now, the air wasn't on and the windows weren't open, and there just wasn't any sort of wind that could have sent them that far across my room. My friend and I screamed and ran downstairs and we told everyone, and I put the tacks in a drawer on top of my dresser, and after that it never happened again. So this will be the last story because I don't want this getting too long. So at the time that this happened, I was living with 3 out of 5 of my sisters. It was my older sister Heather, Callan, and my younger sister Beverly. Like I said in the story above too, my family has always kind of just been in touch with the paranormal. So, my older sister Caitlin, the one who was sensitive to the paranormal as well, kept telling us that she felt that there was a ghost boy living in a closet. We kind of just shrugged it off and didn't really think too much about it because it was kind of normal for us that these types of things happened. A few weird things happened around our house and in a room that we couldn't really explain, but they were all small and not worth going into detail about. But one morning, my sister woke up and we all talked about our dreams, and my older sister Heather told us that she had a weird dream about an older woman coming to her and asking not to tell our parents that she was staying out of her house because she was scared or something. And that was it. That was the dream. But at the same time, my sister Kaylin kind of just looked at her, shocked, and told us that she had dreamt of a boy in her closet asking her if it was okay for her family to stay with us for a bit, and asked her not to tell my parents that they were there because they didn't want to be sent away. We all were surprised and freaked out that they had the exact same dream but with different people. We told our parents, who said that they sort of felt bad, that they felt scared, and that they wouldn't send them away. A long while passes, and at this time, my parents had a radio show and would interview a lot of people in the paranormal field. They would talk to psychics and things like that, and they made a lot of friends in the paranormal field. One day, my parents are in this Skype call with one of their paranormal sensitive psychic friends, and asked my sister Kaylin to talk to her because she might relate to her, and long story short, this girl had told my sister about the family staying with us and told us that they had apparently passed on when we visited a church to celebrate one of my family members being baptized. I'm not religious, but some people in my family are. And my sister started bawling her eyes out because she was so shocked that this girl knew all of this, and at this time she sort of felt validated that a stranger was telling her, and her parents too, something that she had experienced this whole time. And my parents were just as shocked because they hadn't even spoken about this to anyone but people within our house. So, to end the story, we never heard anything about the family again, and I hope they're doing well wherever they are, but it was a trip, let me tell you. So let me start this off by giving some background information about myself before I actually share my encounter. So, I'm a 24-year-old female that has spent a majority of my life outdoors camping and hiking through wild terrain. I've also been studying zoology and biology for the last 6 years and have been in close proximity to bobcats mid-hunt, protective mama bears, and even territorial elk. I'm disclosing this because all of these experiences have been quite scary, but I have never been more terrified than I was the night that I encountered an unknown entity in northern Arizona. So, in March of 2018, I decided to go on a back road drive with a friend of mine at about 2 a.m. That area is well known for almost zero light pollution, which makes the sky almost mesmerizing on a clear night, which that night was. The area I was driving in was thick pine forest, and I was on alert because of the large elk in the region. After about an hour, my friend and I made it to a paved road leading back towards home. The road was a T-shape, and we were stopped at a stop sign, taking a moment to update our playlist. I'm about to shift out of park when I look about 30 feet in front of me. I'm facing the pine tree line that my headlights are illuminating, and the tree line sat along a small 5-foot ridge that was parallel to the road that I was going to turn onto, when I noticed what looked like a door-sized block straight out of my view that appeared to be warped, sort of. It looked like one of those portals in space movies, but less intense, and I could still see a distorted image through the forest behind the block. I sat there for a while before I told my friend that I thought that I was hallucinating. To clarify too, I was definitely not under the influence of any substance. But I was definitely concerned and was about to suggest that they drive instead since my vision seemed to be impaired. That is, until they told me that I wasn't hallucinating because they were witnessing the same thing. Without looking away from the block, we both described the same exact image, so at this point I was actually freaked out. We're pretty logical people, I'd like to think, and so we didn't want to jump to any conclusions. I mean, there must be a rational answer, right? So, of course, we do what sane people do on a dark back road. We put my car in park and we get out of the vehicle. I know, not smart. We kept my headlights on as we crossed the road heading towards the distorted block, and we noticed that as we moved, the portal wasn't moving from its original spot. So it ruled out any kind of fumes possibly interfering. As I reached the ridge that the portal sat on top of, my friend stopped. He said that it didn't feel right and that he thought that we should go back to the car. He's smarter than me. At that point, I was more intrigued than scared, and I was already within 10 feet of this thing, so might as well finish the job. I started walking up the 5-foot incline when I was filled with the most intense dread that I had ever experienced. I could almost reach out and touch the warped doorway when my foot softly planted itself directly in front of it. And at that exact moment, the most horrendous noise erupted. It honestly sounded almost as if someone had dropped a metal tank straight out of the air. It was the loudest metallic crash that I had ever heard in my life. I was startled by the noise, obviously, and lost my footing and slipped down the ridge, and caught my footing right as I was next to my friend. We both looked at each other in scared confusion when the night air filled with what sounded like 3 dozen coyotes calling each other. I'll admit that it's pretty common for coyotes to call out in groups. They're kind of known for it, but what's unusual about this specific situation was that the 3 dozen coyote howls sounded like they were screeching in our ears. It was so loud, in fact, that we had to cover our ears as we ran to the car. I felt like I was about to be attacked by all of them, and they were about to jump on me by how close the screams were. As I was running back across the street, I was looking around desperately for the coyotes to determine just how many there were, but there was not a single one in sight. As soon as we slammed and locked the doors of the car, the noise that was almost debilitating the moment before just completely went silent. Nothing, not even a single peep. I looked up as I was shifting into drive and saw that the warped portal was now gone. Confirmed with my friend that he no longer saw it too, and we just drove the hell out of there. We got home in record time, and we ran inside my home and pretty much discussed what happened until the sun came up. Now, we both encountered the same exact phenomena out there on that road. We both saw the warped apparition, and we heard the same noises. We were both filled with a nauseating dread and were hysterical in what we had experienced. We couldn't solve it logically, and we were desperate for answers the next day when we started speaking with some friends who grew up in the local Navajo reservation. When we shared the experience, they were all convinced that we had encountered a skinwalker. When I first heard the term, I was sure that they were just kidding, but they truly believe in this, and they grew up with warnings from their elders, so the fear that they have for this thing is real. Some would even walk with blessed ash on their foreheads to discourage skinwalker encounters, a sort of protection charm, if you will. So I looked into other skinwalker encounters, and it's a real inconsistent mess of stories out there, but I've come across a few that are eerily similar to my own experience. Other people who don't think that I'm crazy have suggested that it's a possible alien encounter, their reason being the metallic crash that we heard. I'm not as convinced with this possibility, but I've definitely got an open mind, and I mean, who really knows what the hell happened? But if you have any insights or questions or redirections in these theories, then please share them with me. Of course, no one's really going to know for sure what I encountered, but I know that whatever it was in that forest was nothing that I've ever studied or come across before. And I knew that I was in the presence of something supernatural or the like, or at least something that was very dangerous. I know a lot of people who have had weird and unexplained things happen to them in the high desert regions, and now I know just why they don't go out alone anymore. So I work at a church as an office admin. I'm not a member or even a believer, but it's a good job. This often means that if the minister is out ministering, I'm completely alone in a very large building. Usually I like to be able to work with nobody bothering me, and I relish the days when nobody drops in or calls. And it was one of those quiet days, and I needed to take a stack of materials into the chapel. We never have lights on unless we're just using a space, and I usually don't bother turning them on for the chapel or anything. I mean, there are stained glass windows anyway, so there's enough light to see. And it's really pretty too, with just the window light coming in. So, the area where I'm dropping off some printed materials is up a few steps on the raised area where the choir and the organ and the pulpit are. I drop the stuff, I turn around, and I'm just about to walk back when I notice something. Now, this is a pretty old church with pretty massive wooden pews, so if you're walking straight down the aisle, you only see the backs of them sticking up and whatnot, and you don't really see the seats or the ground between the pews. But from up on the platform area, there's enough of an area that I can see a coat lying on the floor between two rows of pews. I'm not really surprised. We have a lot of people forget stuff on Sundays. Someone once forgot their teeth there. That was a fun one to look for. So I'm heading down the aisle, looking down each row of the pews to find the one the jacket was laying under, when I realize that it isn't actually a jacket, because there's a man lying on the floor. Now, it's important to note that there are 3 aisles in this church, the main center one and 2 side ones. I always use the side one closest to the office out of habit. It's dumb, but I just feel silly walking down the wide center aisle of a church. The aisles are carpeted, and I wear black, dressy sneakers to work and tend to walk quietly. The man on the floor is facing the center aisle, and I freeze and stare at him, expecting him to sit up and say something, but I realize that he hasn't noticed me yet. He's kind of wiggling his feet, not a lot, just kind of rocking his shoes on the floor, so I'm pretty sure that he's awake, or at least alive. And quite honestly, I have no idea what to do. I've got severe anxiety and CPTSD, and I've long known my fight or flight response is freeze like a dumbass. So I'm just staring at this guy on the floor trying to think of something to say. I'm still not sure what I should have said. I mean, hello sir, wouldn't you rather have a seat or something? But as I'm thinking this, the main doors to the church open. I'd literally forgotten that Paul, one of the members of the congregation, was coming in to do some painting work today. He spots me frozen in the chapel and comes in. He pokes his head in and hollers, "Hey, I'm going to start working out front, okay?" at me. And as soon as Paul started talking, the guy on the floor started craning his head around to see what was going on, or to see who Paul was talking to, I assume. But of course, this man has now spotted me, and my stupid brain still has my jaw wired shut and my feet glued to the floor. The man on the floor starts absolutely screaming. I've honestly never heard a grown man full-out scream like that in real life. It didn't sound scared or angry to me. He wasn't trying to make words out at all, it was honestly just noise. He scrambles to his feet though and starts running down the aisle to the door and slams into it. He charges right out of the building, right past Paul, who just kind of stands aside and watches the man run off. We just look at each other for a long minute before Paul comes over and asks if I'm okay and what that was all about. I have no idea, and I look down and the man on the floor is left behind a backpack. Me and Paul lock the outside doors and take it to the office. I call the cops and they say that they'll send someone to collect the bag and look around the neighborhood, but they don't sound really bothered. Paul decides to look in the backpack and I try telling him not to, but I'm frankly curious as well. Inside the backpack is a Bible, several disposable plastic spoons covered in foil, an empty bag of hand sanitizer, a roll of plastic wrap, one sock, and a pack of crayons. The Bible? It's one of ours, and he's coloured it. Not like a child, or how you'd think a crazy person would either. It's not all scribbles all over, and he didn't draw pictures, or write in it, or circle things. He has literally coloured the words. Like going along one sentence at a time, colouring words or parts of words different colours. It kind of looks like highlighting in different colours but with crayons, and with the sections of different colours changing randomly as well. There's no blank gaps, so all the pages he's gone through look like a series of rainbow stripes, and it's actually really neatly done. He's gotten through the Old Testament up to the book of Ezra, which is about a third of the way through the whole Bible, which means that he's been colouring for a very long time. And this is what concerns me. How long had he been in there to colour that far? Or did he come in before and take a Bible with him and then come back? And of course, what was he doing laying on the floor, and why did he run out screaming like that? This happened months ago, and the good news is that I haven't seen him since. But I am definitely uncomfortably aware of just how vulnerable I am at work now. I come from a big country family, and we live on a farm. We raise our own food and meat animals, and we hunt and process and whatnot. My dad's first cousin is even a licensed taxidermist, so we get a lot of hunting in. For a bit of backstory, on the homestead that I grew up on, and still live on, it was my parents, my pop's first cousin and his wife, me and my 4 sisters, and my 4 female second cousins. So 4 adults and 9 kids, with lucky me being the only boy. And sometimes my pop's brother comes to stay with us too, especially when hunting season is starting up. So hunting season, deer, is going on, and my pops, his brother, Uncle K, and the cousin that we live with, Uncle V, are all getting ready to go hunting. Some of us kids decide to tag along, me 12 and my sister S 15, and my cousin A 14. We get permission from one of my Uncle K's friends to hunt his land a ways away, basically several hundred acres of forest. An important fact too is that during the time that we were setting up, my pops and uncles were being quiet while the 3 of us kids were talking. But my voice hasn't changed, and this is important. So us kids keep chattering away while the adults are just letting us get our energy out while they check the survival equipment, making sure the guns are clean and working and all that. The strong silent southern types, you know. And all of a sudden there's a rustling in the thick brush around us, and suddenly 3 creepy looking guys enter the clearing. They stop dead. One of them has a hand on his knife on his belt. They're clearly drunk as hell, and they keep looking between A and S and my pops and uncles like they're debating something. My pops and uncles stand up. Last bit of backstory too. Every dude in my family is huge. I'm 19 now and I'm 6'5". My dad is the biggest of 6'10", 280. Just deeply intimidating, and so are my uncles V and K. The guys laugh nervously as my Uncle V picks up one of the rifles and points it at them. These dudes start running out of the clearing like the devil was after them, and my pops immediately says that we're clearing out. My uncles don't even question it, and neither do us kids. We're freaking out and totally take things down sloppy, but my pops doesn't say anything about us messing up his camping equipment. We get back into cell service, and my dad calls the cops about seeing those guys, but the cops just don't seem to think that it's serious since nothing happened. We also told the owner of the land, who took it more seriously as he had kids of his own, but we never heard anything about them appearing again on his land to his knowledge. It's at that moment, though, that I realized A, S, and me, with my unchanged voice, were the only ones these guys could hear talking, and they obviously thought that they'd come across a camp of 3 girls by themselves. About 4 years ago, I was a line cook at a restaurant that was located in a hotel. I worked at this restaurant for nearly 2 years with no problem walking the half-mile or so distance that it took me to reach the bus that I took to get home from my job. But this restaurant had a partnership with the hotel for late-night room service. So, pretty much every night after closing the restaurant, 1, sometimes 2, line cooks would stay after until 3 a.m, preparing simple things like salads, sandwiches, and wraps that would then be taken to the rooms via hotel employees. Now, me being a recent college grad in my early 20s would always volunteer myself for the extra hours. Student loans and rent cost a lot of dollars, and as I said prior, I had worked this job for a decent amount of time with no problems. Except for one rainy night that I'll never forget. As I left my work that morning around 3 a.m, I realized that I'd messed up when I forgot an umbrella that day. I now had to make my normal walk under decent rainfall. After lighting a cigarette and putting in my headphones, I was ready to make my unfortunate journey, though. I started on my normal routine walking back, cutting through the alleyways that I'd memorized as my shortcuts through the city. And about halfway through my walk, a car started following next to me with the passenger window down. Aware of my surroundings, I had recognized this, but decided to mind my business and keep my head down and just keep walking. Growing up in a rough neighborhood taught me better than to put my nose where it doesn't belong. Unfortunately, though, that wasn't enough. Over the music coming from my headphones, I could hear shouting coming from the car. I turned to face the car driver, but didn't stop walking. He looked back at me, and it was a white man in his late 30s, early 40s with a bandana and sunglasses on. I remember thinking that it was odd that he was driving with sunglasses so late in the night, but he said, "Hey man, where are you heading?" And I could hear him say that. At this point, I took one of the earbuds out and replied, "What's it to you?" To which he answered, "I figured I'd ask. You look like you need a ride to get out of the rain." I told the guy that I'm all set and that I was almost at my destination anyway. Now keep in mind, I'm still walking and he's driving slowly next to me on this side of the street at 3 a.m. He replied with, "No problem. Do you smoke weed, man?" At this point, I was annoyed with this guy. I had just gotten done working 13 hours in a kitchen, and all I wanted to do was listen to some damn music and unwind before bed. I told the guy, "No man, I don't," even though I actually do, but I replied in a stern and obviously annoyed tone this time. He just looked at me, almost like he knew that I was bullcrapping him. I said, "Have a good night," before replacing my earphone back into my ear and taking a ride up a one-way side street, losing him in the process. I arrived at my bus stop safely and with about 10 minutes to spare. I was the only one there besides one other man and a homeless man sleeping on a bench some ways up, and after about 3 minutes, the car pulls up to the side of the curb, directly in the bus lane. This time, I'm actually facing him. He rolled down the window and said, "You're heading to the south side, huh?" I replied, "How do you know?" And he pointed above me. I looked up, and on the digital board it says the next bus destination and time. He said to me, "Do you want a lift there? I'm heading that way." And at this point, I was all set and the hood came out of me. I told him, "Hey man, I don't know you and I don't want to ride with you, so move." He just stared at me again, but this time I stared back. We locked eyes for a good 20 seconds before the bus approached behind him, honking loudly. The guy checked his rearview mirror, rolled up the window, and just sped off. On the way home, I remember looking behind me and my surroundings to make sure this creep didn't try to follow me home. Luckily, he didn't, and when I got off the bus, I was in my apartment safe within about 5 minutes. But fast forward a few weeks, and one of my buddies who I work with asked me if I heard about the body the cops found in a dumpster behind the grocery store, less than 5 minutes from the hotel. I told him no, but he said that the body of a girl was found strangled to death and the cops are on the lookout for the killer, still at large. The cops had no evidence and were asking for people to come forward with additional information. I hadn't told my buddy or anyone besides my girlfriend at that time what had happened that night, and when I told him the story, he insisted that I call the cops and tell them what happened. I told him that I would, but in truth, I never actually did. Call me old school, but like I said earlier, I learned growing up to just mind my own business and avoid trouble, and trouble won't find me. So that's what I did. To this day, I still haven't heard anything more on the case. I wonder if it was the same guy, and I think about how weird it was for him to approach me the way that he did, at such an odd hour of the day. The sunglasses, the following me to the bus stop. That stuff doesn't normally happen, right? Anyway, after that experience, I started walking home with my knife in my pocket, and walked with only one earphone in the whole time so that I could hear my surroundings better. I also stopped volunteering for the overnight shift as well. I do hope that whoever killed that girl gets caught, or at least has a change of heart. It's crazy just how fragile life is. Hey. This happened when I was about 10, I think, or at least around that age. I'm 15 now. So, I'd been at my cousin's wedding, which was across the country, and we had to stay in a hotel at the time. We'd been up since 8 a.m. and spent the whole day celebrating, so everyone was very tired. My dad had been drinking and wasn't able to drive us back to the hotel, so my mum, my sister and I made plans to get a lift from my auntie and my uncle. My dad and my brother went with my other auntie and uncle. Anyway, we had left the venue and had been driving for about 10 minutes down a dark, deserted one-way road. Everything was fine. I was sitting in the back seat with my mum and my sister, and we're all just chatting, although I was kind of half asleep. That was until my uncle cursed under his breath and the car slowed down. This woke me up fully because I knew that the road was very long and there were only trees on this side of it. Also, I was young and I believed that cursing was a terrible sin at the time. But when the car completely stopped, I sat up a bit, trying to see what was going on. Then, to my horror, I saw a man walking towards the car. This wouldn't have been as scary as it was if it weren't pitch black, in the middle of nowhere, and if the man didn't have a load of glass shards in his face. It was truly just a horrifying sight. There were pieces of glass in his skin, and it was just so bloody, and there was even a big shard sticking out of his cheek. He knocked on the window and motioned for my auntie to roll down her window. She rolled it down a bit, and my uncle asked, "What do you want?" The man with this glass in his face asked, "Could you give me and a friend a ride to the hospital?" A friend, I thought to myself. I couldn't see another man. That's when a second man walked out from the bushes, and he also had glass in his face, and it was also really bloody. The second man walked over to the driver's side of the car where my uncle was. He asked my uncle to roll down his window as well. My uncle complied, but like my auntie, he only rolled it down a small bit. And the guy asked, "Can you please give us a ride?" My auntie told him, "I'm sorry, but there isn't any room." The first man looked at the back seat as if he didn't believe my auntie. He made eye contact, and it was probably the scariest 5 seconds that I've ever experienced. Just then, he pulled on the handle of the car door and it opened. This is when I started to panic, and I could feel my mum tense up. My auntie struggled with the man to try and close the door. Luckily though, the man seemed like he'd been drinking, so he wasn't as strong as he would have been if he was sober. The second man didn't seem to be doing much, he just kind of seemed to be watching the whole thing play out. Finally, my auntie was able to close the door and locked it. She said, "Please just take this, I'm sorry," and she scrambled out a $20 note. I can't remember if the man actually took it or not, but the last thing that I do remember about that night was my uncle driving away as fast as he could. After that, I think that I fell asleep or I was in shock from what had just happened. But I wonder now, what would have happened if there was room in the car? Would the men have tried to hurt us, or were they actually in a terrible accident and genuinely needed a ride? I don't know, but I'm just thankful that we got away that night, with everyone pretty much unscathed. I'm an 18-year-old female with 2 female roommates of the same age. We just moved to a very big city, and we live in a small apartment complex with a classic dark, scary back alley, which just so happens to be where my roommate's parking spot is located as well. So, I work overnight, and one night I got off work at around 12:30, midnight. My roommate picked me up and we headed home. We were being pretty loud, talking and laughing as we made our way around the building and up to the stairs to our apartment. And the second that we got in and sat down on the couch, our doorbell rang. We were of course very confused, and from our position on the couch, we can see out the window to our outer door. The way that our apartment is arranged, you unlock a door to get into a hallway that has doors leading to our apartment, and our neighbours as well, but it looks like the outer door leads directly into our apartment from the outside. And there's a large, middle-aged man outside our door. He sees us sitting on the couch and starts talking to us, asking us to open the door, that he needs help. He tells us that someone is trying to rob him, and he needs us to open the door and call the police for him. We immediately jump up and step out of view of the window, obviously not near stupid enough to open the door. We hear our neighbour's door open though. 2 males live next door to us and they're very nice. We peek out into the hallway and tell him what's going on. He opens the door, talks to the man, tells him to wait outside while he gets his phone. We can hear their exchange through the window. Our late night visitor tells our neighbour that he has a bunch of silver ingots or something on him and that they're worth a lot of money. Some guy was trying to rob him right outside and he needs someone to call the cops. The neighbour complies, but while he's ringing the police, the guy just takes off running, never to be seen again. The cops never showed up either, and I know that that isn't a big deal, but that asking for help thing is a classic serial killer ploy apparently. Plus, he was supposedly getting robbed right outside where we just were, and we didn't hear or see a thing. It has bad intentions written all over it, but either way, we were left pretty creeped out that night. So I had a creepy experience that I never really thought too much about, but I figured that I'd share it. So one morning, probably around 4 a.m. I think, I woke up to a very strange kind of growling of voice. I guess I moved and looked over my shoulder. My boyfriend noticed that I was awake and said, "You heard that too, right?" Confused, I said yes, it woke me up. He said that he woke up to this feeling of an evil presence to the left side of the room in the corner. He said that he was laying there and began praying silently, and it was while he prayed that this thing began growling and speaking something that he couldn't understand. After I woke up, it apparently stopped. It wasn't one of our pets, I can assure you of that. The windows were closed. It wasn't from outside or another room, because it sounded as clear as someone talking to you only 10 feet away. I've had a couple of other strange things happen in this apartment too. Once when I was washing dishes, a screw flew across the room and hit me in the center of my back. Above me was ceiling, and there were no lights or anything, and from where it hit me, it had definitely been thrown. It's all kind of interesting, and we're currently looking at a house built in 1883 to move into from this apartment, so secretly I kinda hope this next place is haunted as well. Call me crazy, but I enjoy the thrill. So I'm on a trip backpacking around Europe with my brother, currently in Paris. We're staying in this hostel and we're in a 10-bunk bedroom. There was this one guy in the room who was immediately super weird. Almost right away, in fact. Like, as soon as we got settled, he starts talking to us about flying to Libya. He's all, "Us Libya, fly tomorrow," and me and my brother were just like, no dude. He keeps saying it though, and we keep saying no, and he's getting progressively more assertive about it. As me and my brother are going around doing some sightseeing and stuff, I keep seeing this dude around as well. When we're at the hostel, he kept following us to the dining hall, out onto the terrace, and I'm getting more and more creeped out. My brother, ever the non-assertive soul that he is, just laughs it off like the dude is joking. This goes on for 2 days, and well, this morning, we were going out to breakfast, and I forgot my phone back in the room, so I told my brother to just go ahead, and I ran back to get it. I go in the room, and the dude is sitting there. There's no one else in the room, and I honestly contemplated just leaving it, but I didn't trust it alone in the room, so I planned to just grab it quickly. That morning he was still on about Libya and was essentially bending over our beds going on about it, despite me repeatedly telling him to stop talking to us. I go in and grab my phone when he suddenly just yells, "Libya, now, we go now." I'm very scared since at this point we're the only ones in this room, and I just say, "No, dude," and I go to leave when he blocks the door and grabs my shoulder, still going on about going to the airport and flying to Libya. I shove past him and run away to where my brother and I were going to breakfast. I decided that we're going to switch rooms because this dude was officially creep level 100. We make it back to the hostel, and before we talk to the front desk, we went outside for a smoke and he shows up. I almost yell at him this time to leave us alone, and he just flat out says no. I go to the front desk and explain that this dude has been harassing us and we wanted to change rooms. I mentioned what went down in the room, and before I knew it, the cops were called and I was giving a statement. As they were sorting it out though, there were a couple of things that really jumped out at me. The first was that this guy didn't pay in advance. Normally when you're staying in a hostel, you pay the full amount up front, or if you're staying for a while, you pay weekly. He was apparently paying by the day. And the second thing, he had several pieces of ID in his wallet, none of which matched his description. Apparently Paris has been having a problem with human trafficking, and this guy was escorted out of the hostel by the police. He was banned from staying there again ever, and me and my brother switched rooms and were given vouchers for free dinners for the rest of our stay there. And now, I'm terrified to go out by myself. I swear, if me and that guy had been alone in a more secluded place that didn't have cameras everywhere, I'm pretty sure that I would have been shipped off to Libya. So I was only a baby when this happened, and this is technically my mum's story. A bit of background. My mum had me pretty young. She was 21 and she wasn't married. Her and my dad were only dating when I was born, and she was about 22 when this whole thing occurred. They both went to the same church with friends that they had met in high school, Louis, Christine, and Quill. My mum was riding in Quill's car at the time. I was a 1-year-old in the back seat. Mum basically took me everywhere, and everyone was heading towards a church event that they were all excited for. Louis, my dad, and Christine were all in separate cars, but they trailed Quill because they were all heading in the same place anyway. At some point, my mum and Quill were stuck at a stoplight. They were chatting until my mum says that she just got this really uneasy feeling. She never had a problem with people keeping their doors unlocked, but she just couldn't shake how she felt at that moment. Finally, she spoke up, requesting what she suddenly felt was necessary. She said, "Hey Quill, can you please lock the doors?" Quill was confused. It was an odd thing for my mum, the monarch of never locking doors, to ask this. And he said, "What? Wait, why?" And she said, "I don't know, I just have a feeling about it." Quill didn't object, locking the doors just as my mother asked. The light went green and everyone drove off. It wasn't until the next stoplight that my mum and Quill both experienced something that sure made them glad that they had actually locked the doors. As they sat there chatting away, these two guys from a car next to them got out of their vehicles. Mind you, we're on a road with a bunch of other people next to us, so these guys must have been drunk or high or something. But quickly, they make their way over to Quill's car, one on each side. They begin to feverishly pull on the door handles, trying desperately to get it open. My mum and Quill screamed. They were still at a stoplight and couldn't move without hitting the cars next to them. And after realizing that my mum's door didn't work, one of them went for the door closest to me. He tried to open it with all of his might until him and his douchebag buddy started to try and break the windows. Thankfully, the light turned green and Quill sped them out of there quickly. My mum and Quill were both in shock. Christine called them, freaking out because she saw the whole thing from a couple of cars behind. She asked them if they were okay, which, although being in shock, they weren't harmed. My dad called her and told her that he and Louie were going to handle it, which my mum believed, and they all went on their way. To this day, my mum says that she still doesn't know what my dad and Louie did to the guys. My dad said that he found them, but that's all that he would say about it. Louie acted similarly, not speaking of what happened, and even after my parents got married and got divorced, she still doesn't have a clue. The first year of middle school, a lot of things happened that I believe really shouldn't have. About a month before school started, a day before my birthday in fact, I got my period for the first time. I know, sorry for that, but it's actually important to the story. I called my friend a few days afterward to tell her. I was a bit of an early bloomer, so I was one of the first in my friend group to start. Well, later on, this particular friend of mine and I got into a fight, and her retaliation was to start a rumor about me around the school that I was pregnant and had sex with a high schooler. Throughout the day, I noticed people giving me weird looks, and I had no idea what it was about until my friends told me. I came home bawling my eyes out, and my sister knew why. Being in a small town, rumors spread like wildfire, and everyone already knew about it. This girl at the school that my sister was at told her about it, and she went off at her. This started a whole chain of events with me crying, figuring out who it was, and my mum at the principal's not leaving until they promised to do something about it. It slowly started getting better, but walking home from school, I live nearly across the street, became just hell. I never learned this guy's name, but the first day he followed me around on his bike with his best friend. They circled around me, so I had to stop walking, ask me personal questions, which I'd either stay silent or say something snappy, and just a bunch of things to purposefully make me uncomfortable. On the third day, he kept making sexual comments about my body to the point that even his friend said, "Too far, man." After that, he never had his friend with him, and I just kind of broke down a few days of it happening. I was always a really shy, quiet kid. I spent most of elementary school just not talking to anyone. I had no idea how to handle it, and I was scared to ask for help because I didn't think anybody would believe me or take it too seriously. So I simply just didn't say anything. The last day of it happening, though, I think was the worst. He had a group of girls behind him all cheering him on as he was harassing me, and one of them laughed and said, "You should stalk her." And he actually agreed with her, and I'd finally had enough, and I started screaming and cussing him out. He smirked and said, "Feisty, I like it," and I just ran home. I was already at the halfway point. My sister was waiting for me at the front door that day with our dog, only a few months old, so she had heard the whole thing, and she didn't do that often, but it seemed like perfect timing, and she looked panicked and was just like, "Are you okay? Do I need to hurt someone?" and told me that I need to report that to the school. I said that I was fine though, and it was taken care of. She was reluctant, but she let it go. But then he walked past my house, and our dog jumped in front of me and started growling at him. He just sort of chuckled, which really freaked both me and my sister out. A few months before, our house had actually gotten broken into, and because I was home alone a lot, my mum decided to get me a dog to protect me. She's a sweetheart though, and lets people pat her and everything. That's why my sister would sometimes wait for me outside and let kids pet her. But he was one of the only people that she's ever growled at. I'm really afraid that if I didn't stand up for myself or had a dog, that he would have actually followed up on the threat of stalking me. I only saw him around school a couple of times, or once on the student news because he was on the football team and got this award or something. I almost started crying when I saw it, and when he went up to my lunch table because my friend asked him a question and he stared at me the entire time. The last time that I saw him was the last day of school, and I was getting things out of my locker, and when I walked past him, his breath hitched, and he just looked at me the entire time that I was in the hallway. There are a lot of reasons why I hate that town, but after I graduated from 8th grade, he was the biggest reason why I didn't want to go to that high school there. I'm glad that my mum accepted and we moved into the city, and I've had to deal with a fair share of creeps, but he was by far the worst of them. When I was young, I lived in my uncle's basement apartment with my grandparents. And this damn place just always gave out the most creepiest of vibes, especially when I was there alone. It had those gnarly yellow light bulbs in the early 90s splashing light off the brick-walled interior, and it just gave the whole place an eerie yellowish-brown tinge. It always just gave me the creeps. Now, one early fall evening, my grandpa was out with friends while my grandma would do the usual Sunday afternoon ritual where she would make a gigantic pot of whatever stew or curry dish, and she would break it down into serve-size portions and then freeze them to be used or eaten throughout the week. The house was old and getting to the point where creaks and bangs from walls were a pretty normal occurrence. I was also convinced that parts of the floor were unlevel, as the door to my bedroom, when opened to a certain angle, would slowly begin to close on its own, making a creaking noise the whole way. So for example, if you open the door at a 90-degree angle, it would slowly close itself to a 25 angle, but never actually slam shut. The windows were spread out throughout the basement, but they were those slim 9 by 18 inches or whatever sliding windows that were way up top of the wall and too high for me or Grandma to reach without using a chair. Only Grandpa was tall enough to access them without help. So, on this Sunday afternoon, my Grandma proceeds to start cooking as the choice of curry dish that she had thought up required a good 4 to 5 hour slow simmer. I was in the living room or family room just kind of bouncing around, building planes out of Lego and playing rescue missions with the little Lego men. In the kitchen, the stove was in the corner, and across the stove, maybe a good 6-foot gap, was the fridge. Above the stove was one of the windows that I mentioned earlier. So, Grandma starts the simmer and casually joins me in the living or the family room and turns on a movie as she normally would on a Sunday afternoon. I wasn't really into the movie at first. It was some foreign one, but once the action scene started with all the kung fu and the fists flying, I was pretty captivated, so I joined her on the couch, spellbound by all those explosions and people fighting all over the place. Occasionally, every 10 to 15 minutes or so, my grandma would pause the movie to go check on whatever she was cooking as the aroma started to fill the entire basement, and I'm sure the whole upstairs house as well. Sometimes I would join her, being the curious little tyke that I was, and ask questions like, "Did you use tomatoes today? Is there meat in there? Where did you learn how to make this?" Grandma always responded and explained in detail. She was always proud of making food for us. So, as we're nearing the end of the movie, we are both startled by a loud bang and a crashing noise. My grandma jumps off the couch and goes dashing into the kitchen with me maybe 3 steps behind her. What I saw that day, I still can't explain. The big pot of food that I was mentioning was laying next to the fridge on the other side of the kitchen. The curry had splashed all over the wall and spilled all over the floor, and some of it even on the fridge. In my panicked state, I stream off stuff like "what the hell" questions for Grandma, who went eerily silent as she grabbed towels and began cleaning up this crazy mess. I began helping her and pointing out stupid little details because I still don't understand how this pot flew like 5 or 6 feet through the air and seems to be what hit the fridge before it came crashing to the floor as if someone had picked it up and thrown it across the kitchen. But my grandma, she just stayed silent until it was cleaned up. Once cleaned, we began inspecting the area to now come up with a conclusion of what could have happened. The windows were all closed because, being fall, the basement can get quite cold in the fall and winter months in Canada. They were also way too small for someone to fit through and escape in a matter of seconds, or to be opened from the outside. We tried this many times as kids, in fact, when we forgot our keys and we were locked out after school, and going through that window was just never an option. The simmering pot could have vibrated off the stove, I suppose, but then how did it get like 6 feet across the kitchen and slam into the fridge like that? A few hours later, my grandpa came home and, me being like 8 or 9 years old, ran over screaming. The curry went flying. Of course, he just gave me a big hug and ignored me, figuring that I'm just being a nutty little kid. But that's when my grandma grabbed him, pulling him into the room and closing the door behind them. I snuck up to the door to hear what they were saying, but I couldn't make anything out. But my grandpa is a pretty serious ex-military guy who doesn't really have a sense of humor or mess around unless it comes to us grandkids. And then he's a total clown, making funny faces, telling jokes and stories about whatever he felt was fitting to help guide us youngsters along. He always pushed us to be curious and always helped find answers to the questions that we had. But once he came out of that room, his demeanor was just different. He wasn't his usual smiling, let's play games with grandkids form. He was quiet, rigid, and in thought. They went into the kitchen and he looked around. I stayed quiet behind both my grandparents, just observing and trying to make sense of it all. We ended up ordering pizza that night, and during pizza, like stupid kids do, and they can't let go of things, I brought up the issue again with my grandpa. He stayed quiet the whole time, and my grandma responded with, "We're not going to be talking about that anymore," in a very stern voice, and I felt like I was sort of in some kind of trouble or something. I never once brought it back up after that, and to this day, I still can't explain the mysterious case of the flying curry. So I was at a concert of my co-worker that time, and it wasn't really good, and at a church in a small town, 40 minutes away by car from the town that I lived. And when it was over, I found out that I missed my last bus. I asked my co-worker if I could sleep at his place, but he rejected it. So I did what I always do in such a situation. I walked. It was the time before smartphones, so the only way for me to find the right path was by reading the street signs and hope for the best. I'll also admit that I cried the entire time while I was walking. It was 2 a.m. though when I arrived at the next train station. I thought that I could take a ride with a cab, but there were no cabs. I didn't know what to do, so I waited at the place where the cab should be and I smoked a cigarette. Should I walk the way home? Another hour by foot, or even more at least. Should I wait until a cab shows up, or the first train in the morning? I didn't know what to do. But then, a car showed up and stopped in front of me. The man inside rolled down the passenger window and spoke to me. "Hey, can you give me a light, please?" he said. I wasn't comfortable at all going over to him, but I did. I gave him a light and quickly turned around and stood at the same place as before. He didn't drive away, though, and asked where I had to go, and I said in which town that I lived, and he invited me to get into his car. He said that it was on the way and he could bring me home. After thinking about it for some time too, I really just don't know why I even got in the car. I didn't even want to, but I guess I was tired. The ride itself wasn't bad at all. We had a bit of small talk and he drove the usual route that I knew and he wasn't creepy at all while driving. And I thought maybe he was just really a nice guy, just trying to help me out. So I guided him to my house, but he didn't stop in front of it. Instead, he drove a bit further away. I thanked him and gave him my lighter as a gift, and when I was about to open the door and leave the car, he said, "What the hell is wrong with you?" I was surprised by this sudden mood change, and I asked, caught off guard, "What?" I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something along the lines of, "That's not how you thank someone who drove you home in the middle of the night. I expect you to do another favor for me in return." Something like that anyway. I kind of understood what he implied, but well, I'm no hooker. So I chuckled a little bit, thanked him again, gave him the lighter, and I got out of the car. I was walking towards my home too when I heard him opening the door and closing it. The door of his car, that is. And then the sound of him running towards me. I looked over my shoulder and saw him getting closer to me. I shrieked, kind of like a mouse, and I started running as well. At the door of my home, I quickly opened it, got inside, locked it, ran upstairs to my bedroom, locked my door as well, and just hid under my blanket. I got away, and nothing else happened that night. He didn't do anything else, and he left, and after that, I never saw him again. So my friend in the neighborhood found a Ouija board in his brother's stuff while he was away at college. He told me what it was and asked me if I wanted to play it with him. Trying to impress him, I said yes, and we went into his room and we tried it out. But nothing happened and we were left pretty disappointed. But later that week he called me and told me that he looked up how to use the board properly and wanted to give it another go. I agreed, as I was pretty confident nothing would happen again. So we grabbed a bunch of scented candles and we placed them around the board and did the whole seance stuff. We asked the board if anyone was there, and it of course went to yes. We thought the other was messing around, but we agreed to take it seriously because I didn't really care if it was just a stupid joke. But we asked the ghost what its name was, and it spelled out Owen. My friend asked if it was a person, and it went to no. We asked what it was, and it actually spelt out demon. I then asked for it to prove it, and you know that call into the intro to Finding Bigfoot? Well, that's the closest thing to what we heard from the garage. But keep in mind, it was only us in the house, and it scared the absolute crap out of us, and we just ran straight out of the house. We also checked the garage after a while, but there was nothing. Anyway, a few weeks go by, and he tells me how he's having paranormal experiences in his house. He feels like he's being watched whenever he's downstairs in the kitchen and the living room. He feels someone sitting on the end of his bed every night. And every time that he walks past the garage, he feels someone grab his wrist and pull it towards the garage. Whenever I went over, I always got that feeling that someone was looking at me from the ceiling. It was definitely weird and unnatural. But then came the scariest part of all. So we were at his house playing Army in his room while no one else was home when we began to hear these heavy footsteps downstairs, except whatever was making it obviously had hooves or something. In fact, it sounded like a full-grown horse was walking around downstairs. Then we heard someone begin to laugh and cough at the same time. My friend ran over and slammed the door shut and we hid. He hid under his bed while I hid in the closet. But then it sounded like someone began scratching his door with like one big claw or something. He started crying and I was honestly on the verge of tears as well. My friend yelled, "Leave us alone, Owen, you're scaring us," and it began to stop, and then we heard it run down the stairs. My friend got up and threw me out of the closet and grabbed the Ouija board that was in there with me. He ran down the stairs, ripped the screen door off of his gas fireplace, threw the thing in there, put the screen back on, and went to turn it on. But when he was just about to turn it on, we heard a loud moan from the basement, which was right behind my friend. He flicked the fireplace on and the board began to burn. And that was pretty much the end of it, and we just played outside since he was way too scared to go back into the house until his parents got home. His parents came home and saw that he'd burned his brother's Ouija board. They grounded him and threw the burnt board away. But after that, there was no more paranormal experiences in my friend's house anymore. But if anyone ever asks me to join in on a seance or with Ouija boards ever again, that's exactly why I will never take part in any of these games ever again. So I, a 21 female, used to live in a really bad neighborhood when I was a kid. Drive-by shootings were not uncommon. Rapes had happened in surrounding houses while we lived there, and before we moved, we also found out that the sweet man across the street was actually a certified sex offender. So, obviously, not a great place for children to walk around alone, right? True, but if you have a 70-pound good boy that is completely dedicated to protecting you, it's doable. So, my mum, little brother in a stroller, me and Spanky, my good boy, went for a walk around the neighborhood to go 2 blocks away to go to the community pool. I, like most 6-year-olds, wanted to wander ahead with my dog because he was always gentle when I had the lead and walked closely to me. As we were nearing the pool, there was a stretch of hedges that lined the walkway to the pool entrance. Spanky was walking ahead of me by maybe about 3 feet. He sniffed towards a bush and just came to a complete stop. He began posturing and growling deeply, baring his teeth to the bush. He had never growled like this before, and to me, it was kind of horrifying to see my best bud like this. I tried to walk around him, and he turned the back end of his body to block me, his eyes still fixed on the bush. I tried again, and he does it yet again, and my mum is still about 4 houses behind and hasn't noticed this yet. But then I see the bush start to move and take a step back. I say to my mum, "Mum, I think Spanky found a kitty." I start taking a step towards the bush and am knocked over completely by Spanky at this point. I'm crying and on the ground, scraped elbow. No biggie, but it definitely gets my mum running. And exactly at this moment, a man bolts out from the bush and takes off running. When Spanky knocked me over, it made me drop his leash, so he booked it after this guy. About 300 feet away from the bush, Spanky caught up with him and made some sickening contact with this guy's ankles and forearms. Now, I've heard a lot of screams on TV and in movies, but I had never heard a real blood-curdling scream like this before. My mum pulled me close and pulled out her phone, fingers shaking. But while she's on the phone with 911, you can hear this guy screaming, "Get him off me," and me going, "Spanky, he's not a kitty." Spanky may have actually mangled a stray cat who wandered into the yard before this, just FYI. But when the police arrived, they asked for a full version of events, and my mum and I gave the details the best that we could. Spanky was sitting contently at our feet after the officers and my mum removed Spanky from this guy. The guy was taken in cuffs, and after a quick checkup by the ambulance, he was fine, just a few good bites. Spanky definitely held back somewhat. But about 10 years later, I asked my mother about it when I was looking through old photo albums and saw a picture of me and Spanky playing in the backyard. She sighed and said, "Oh, you know what happened. We don't need to talk about it." I said, "Well, yeah, but why would he attack some random homeless guy?" And my mum made a really confused face, and I said, "What? That's what happened, right?" She then says, "I guess I can tell you now. I didn't want to tell you back then because I didn't want you to worry, but the man who Spanky pulled out of that bush had been spotted peeking into the houses in the neighborhood that had kids. He was the same man that was hiding in the backyard when you had a sleepover at your friend's house. He had a knife that he dropped when he ran from the bush, and the police thought that he might have been canvassing the neighborhood before he decided who to take, and if it wasn't for Spanky, it might have actually have been you." So yeah, basically, this guy was a complete pedophile that had been spending weeks at night creeping into people's backyards that he knew had children, so that he could break into our rooms individually and kidnap us, and most likely, much worse. I live 300 miles from there now, and still to this day, I cannot handle coming to that stupid hedge, even if I tried. So like I mentioned in my previous story, my boxer actually saved me from almost being kidnapped by someone who scouted us out. And there was a pedophile in the neighborhood who was looking for his chance to strike, but my boy stopped him before he could. But this is actually what led up to this happening, just 1 week beforehand. So like I said in the other story, this was a really bad neighborhood, but it was also full of families with young kids, and most of us in the neighborhood were around the same age and liked to play together. One of my friends was a little girl called Alexis, and we were both 6 years old. We lived right across the street from one another, and we played often when our older sisters who were friends would play too. Most of the time we played in the street, our front yards, or either one of our houses. We also had semi-weekly sleepovers after I had ballet and she had t-ball. But for this particular sleepover, it was Alexis's birthday, so we went door to door in the neighborhood and handed out handmade invitations to the Big 7 sleepover. We went to about 6 or 7 houses, I'd say, to rally our friends, and about 8 little girls in total attended. That night too, her mum let us set up our sleeping bags in the living room, right next to the sliding glass door that led out to the backyard. This was on the opposite side of the house from her mum's room, but we all insisted on sleeping there, and she obliged in the end because she had work the next evening and just wanted to get some sleep. So we were all playing hide-and-go-seek in the living room and the kitchen when Alexa's big sister suggested that we turn off the lights and play in the dark instead. I, afraid of the dark and still used a nightlight religiously, said no, but was quickly outvoted. We were playing for about 5 minutes, and when I was hiding next to the sliding glass door behind the curtain, I was getting bored and decided to look outside. I look outside and I see this big-ass oak tree in the backyard and I see a branch move. I squint and I look a little closer, really hoping that I could see an owl or a squirrel or something. The branch moves again, and this time I see 2 glowing circles. I get really excited and think, that's such a huge owl. Those eyes are ginormous. My sister is the seeker and comes over and finds me because she knows that I always hide there. When she tags me, I say, "Hey sissy, look how big the owl's eyes are." And my sister looks and her expression just goes flat. She says there's nothing there, and I begin insisting that I see a giant owl, and she keeps insisting that there isn't an owl. This draws all the other girls over, and eventually all of us start walking over to the glass door to see. The branch shakes again, but a lot more violently this time, and we all let out a little squeal, and I say, "See, I told you." Alexis starts getting excited too, and then says, "Here, let's turn on the outside light so we can see him better." She then turns on the light, and we then see this dude sitting in a tree, trying to scramble down the trunk and getting stuck on a branch. We all lose it and start screaming our heads off. This wakes a mum up who comes running down the hallway with a handgun in her hand and PJs on, as she was a single mum in the hood and it was a good thing to have. The dude manages to get down right as she gets to the glass, and this badass woman opens the glass, runs into her backyard, gun in hand, and says, "You better keep running." Eventually she comes back in and calms all of us down best that she can while she calls the police, and all of our parents too. Since we all live so close though, most of our parents come before the police did. And, unfortunately after that, we didn't get to sleep over at her house ever again. This happened to me about 5 years ago, I think, so some details are a bit fuzzy, but I'm sharing this exactly how I remember it. So when I was in high school, I was best friends with this girl called Sarah. Sarah and I were practically inseparable, and Sarah was what you would consider the cool girl. She was charismatic, spontaneous, rebellious, confident, and incredibly beautiful. She was also somewhat of a bad influence, though. Don't get me wrong, she never pressured me into doing anything that I wasn't comfortable with, i.e. drinking, smoking, older boys, and all that sort of stuff. But she did bring me into some questionable situations, to say the least. But I truly loved her and cherished our friendship. She was the sister that I really never had, and I'm the eldest child and the only girl born to Eastern European immigrants, so naturally, I grew up in a very strict and controlling household. I realized my parents were only like this to try and protect me, but with feeling so caged, only made me want to venture out more, really. And this itch to be rebellious is what I think caused my lapse of judgment to agree to Sarah's plan that night. So it was a summer break between my junior and senior year of high school. Our mutual friend Riley, an amateur photographer, Sarah's boyfriend Ryan, and their friend Cherry, and myself were all sleeping over Sarah's house. Already a rare occurrence because of how strict my parents were. We were all chilling though on the couch, just watching Ghost Adventures, when Sarah was telling us about an episode that she was watching earlier, about this place called The Domes in Arizona. She was telling us how there was supposedly a satanic cult that practiced there, and how we should go and check it out. But we live southeast of Phoenix, and would be able to get there in about 45 minutes. I looked at my phone's clock and saw that it was about 10 p.m. And this is where I should have objected, but I wanted to do something cool and adventurous, so I said yes. Everyone was excited and grabbed their supplies and piled into my crappy 2005 Golda Honda Accord. And to get to the Domes, you need to drive in the middle of the desert, and anyone who lives in the desert knows just how creepy it can be at night. Maybe it was the dark, desolate highway, maybe it was the realization of what we were going to do, or maybe my guardian angel telling me that I'm a dumbass, but I started to just get really nervous about this trip. My thighs were shaking, and I just had this gut feeling that we should not be going to this place. I tried to voice my concerns as well, but everyone said that I was being paranoid and basically just told me to shut up and drive. We finally got off the highway though and drove on a dirt road for a few miles until we pulled up to a chain link fence with a gap in it. I pulled the car around so it was facing the exit, just in case we needed a speedy getaway. and as soon as I parked, Sarah, Cherry, and Ryan all jumped out and started walking through the fence. Riley hopped out too, but waited about 5 feet from the car for me so I wouldn't have to walk alone. I was hiding everyone's valuables because my car's locking mechanism was actually broken and all the locks need to be manually opened. Since I already had a bad feeling about this place, I opted to keep the doors unlocked, just in case we needed to all get in quickly. As I was hiding their stuff, I had the sudden urge to look to my left. Across the street was a tall line of hedges, and there appeared to be a man standing in the shadows just watching me. For some reason, this didn't immediately spark terror in me. Instead, I was just kind of curious and a bit confused. I was wondering if he actually lived around the area or if it was just a human-shaped shadow or something, but I looked at this thing for about 3 seconds until I finished what I was doing and go out to join Riley. When I got to her, I asked, "Did you see that man?" But Riley, confused, replied with, "What man? I didn't see anybody." So, in the end, I just kind of shrugged it off and we started walking. You needed to walk about an eighth of a mile on dirt to get to the domes, and if you Google Grande Domes, pictures should come up, but I'll describe them anyways. So, there are multiple concrete domes in this center, and they vary in shape. I remember one that stood alone was UFO-shaped, while others were more circular and kind of connected. The domes appeared to be abandoned while they were still being built, and had been standing there for quite some time. They were made of concrete, covered in graffiti, and most had chunks of the ceiling missing as the brutal Arizona sun had wore it down, so much in fact that they'd begun to fall apart. When Riley and I entered one of the domes, the first thing that I noticed was just how the structures manipulated the sound. Because of their shape, sound bounced really strangely inside. You could hear noises across the room like they were right next to you and could barely be able to hear the person right beside you. Also, it was the middle of the night in the desert. There's no light pollution out there, so the only lights that we had were the moon, our phone flashlights, and Riley's dad's police-style flashlight. And the combination of the shadows and the sounds were very disorientating, to say the least. So Riley and I were walking through these domes, chatting as she took photos until we caught up to the rest of the group. As we were walking, I could have sworn that I was hearing footsteps walking behind us on the dirt, and when we were rounding a corner, I looked back and I definitely saw a man tailing us. I saw this man multiple times throughout the night, in fact, and I would always ask Riley if she saw or heard anything too, but she always denied it and again told me that I was just being paranoid. The longer we stayed there, though, just the weirder things became. Others started hearing footsteps echoing outside, even if we were standing still. While we were in the center of the dome, we discovered a giant pentagram drawn on the floor with bones in the middle. I'm hoping that these were just someone's lunch leftovers from their edgy picnic or something, because I don't want to think that we were standing on the remnants of some satanic ritual. But while we were looking at the pentagram, we started hearing scratching on the walls. Not short and rapid scratches like an animal digging, but really long, slow scratches like something or someone was trying to make its presence known. At this point, Ryan and I were asking to leave because it was definitely getting to be a bit too freaky. But then, in the middle of us protesting, Cherry's face became expressionless, and she slowly turned around and started walking towards the back of the room to what appeared to be either an exit or entrance of another room with a pony wall between us and it. As Cherry was walking in this trance-like state, Sarah was saying to her, "Don't go in there. Cherry, someone is following you. I'm telling you, don't go in there, you'll regret it," etc. But we all watched as she turned the corner and walked out of our view. It was probably only a few seconds, but it felt like we were waiting there for at least 5 minutes in anticipation, and then we all heard Cherry let out a blood-curdling scream and run straight back to us. She started telling us how she needed to leave now and she didn't want to be there anymore. I thought for a moment that she was just pulling a prank on us, but the look of fear in her eyes and the trembling in her voice seemed just too genuine for that. Finally, though, everyone agreed to start walking back to the car. When we were within visuals of the car, Sarah suddenly stopped and asked me to look at her back as she lifted her shirt up. And she had 3 long red scratch marks running down the length of her back. I said to her, "Holy crap, you have scratches. Does it hurt?" And Sarah was like, "Yeah, it burns." "What? I have scratches?" I started to reply to her when she interrupted me by screaming, "Run." "You don't have to tell me twice." We all start running towards my car, and as soon as I got in it, I started the car and asked if everyone was in, and they frantically said, "Yes, drive now." So I started to floor it when I heard one of them say, "Wait, Cherry's not here." I immediately stopped and backed up to find Cherry throwing a tantrum in the middle of the street. She yells at me, "No, it's cool, I'll stay here," and sits down in the middle of the street. I began to apologize and tell her to just get in the car, but she ignored me and just continued throwing a fit, yelling about how she wants to stay there and die and generally just being dramatic. I never did really like Cherry, and while I did feel bad about almost leaving her there like that, her throwing a tantrum was really starting to piss me off, and I was thinking about actually leaving her ass there for being a brat. But before I could, Sarah managed to convince her to get into the car and we began to drive off. We were about a quarter mile of the way when I saw a flashlight flickering on and off in the rearview mirror. I stopped and asked the rest of them if they saw that too. They said that they did, and Sarah wanted me to turn around and see what it was. I refused and said that I wouldn't drive us back over there, and to that Sarah replied with, "Okay then, I'll drive." In my 16-year-old brain, I thought that that was a great idea, and so we switched seats and she turned around. The lights appeared to be in the same location as the opening in the fence, but as we passed, we didn't see anything. We continued to drive about another quarter mile until we saw the flashing light in the rearview mirror again. So she turned around and again we didn't see anything when we passed. We repeated this 2 more times until I told her that I was fed up and that someone was probably just messing with us. And so we decided that we should just leave. But as we passed the entrance, she slammed the brakes and she rolled down her window, and in the shadow of the hedges, there was a man standing there just staring at us. The light from our phones were too dim to reach him, and I was asking Riley to hand me her police flashlight, but she was frozen in fear and I couldn't reach it. Sarah and Cherry were yelling at him, asking, "Hey, who are you? Were you the one with the flashlight?" And then when he wouldn't answer, Cherry started to get aggressive with him. She started saying, "Hey, you freak, we're talking to you. What's your deal?" And this next part still gives me shivers to this day. The man then took a step forward into the light so that we could see him, and in that moment, we all collectively realized what he was wearing. He had on a black cloak with a hood up, and as he took another step forward, he raised his arms up to his side in a way that resembled Jesus Christ on the cross, and in the most monotone but sinister voice said, "Don't worry guys, it's just me," and smiled. As he said this, I was drawn to a reflection of light, because he was holding a knife in his left hand. I immediately started yelling at Sarah to drive, and he started sprinting towards the car. She floored it, and as she did, in the rearview mirror, we saw about 10 people run out of the hedges and the fence line towards our car. We were all looking back, screaming our heads off, and when we turned onto the highway, we all eventually calmed down, but after that, nobody spoke. When we reached the nearest gas station, Sarah asked to switch, and I drove the rest of the way back to her house. Sarah and Cherry went to sleep upstairs in their bedroom. Cherry had actually been kicked out of her house and was temporarily living with Sarah, and they shared a room and the bed in the room as well. Ryan and Riley and I slept on the big L-shaped couch downstairs in the living room, and I was obviously still spooked, but said a prayer, and eventually I just fell asleep. And the next day, when I went home, everything was normal. About a week later, though, I got a text from Sarah to meet up. She had dropped out of school the previous semester to get a GED instead, and since I was in AP classes, it wasn't uncommon for me to not see her all week. That evening, she came over to my house, and she just looked awful. Her hair was greasy, her eyes looked tired and bloodshot, and I knew immediately that something was up. I brought her up to my room and asked her what was wrong, and she immediately started crying and told me about the past week. She said that night of the Domes adventure, and every night since then, she's had this same nightmare. She's looking down at herself sleeping from the corner of the bedroom ceiling when this demon begins to crawl out of her closet. Apparently, it has the head of a ram, but the body of a man with no genitalia. It crawls toward her bed and it moves as if every bone in its body is kind of broken. She's filled with absolute dread as all she can do is watch. It climbs onto her bed and breathes heavily over her unconscious body, and at this point, she's so terrified that a single tear drops down onto the beast. The exact moment that the tear makes contact with this creature, its head turns 180 degrees and it makes eye contact with her. And then she immediately wakes up from the dream and begins sobbing. It even got to the point where she was trying to pull an all-nighter, but always ended up passing out from exhaustion. And that morning, she had begun to share her experiences with Cherry, when Cherry began to shake and cry as well. Sarah was confused until Cherry said, "I've been having that exact same dream every night too." After that, everything seemed to settle down, and we eventually lost contact, but I'll never forget that night at the Domes and everything that happened.